Committee will come to order. Today we continue our FY25 budget hearings with the Department of the Air Force. I thank our witnesses for being here and for their service to our nation. The FY25 budget request for the Air Force and the Space Force represents about a 2% increase over FY24. But when you account for inflation, that increase is actually a cut. And that means tough decisions had to be made about what programs to cut and what level of risk to absorb. And like we heard from the Army yesterday, it means the Air Force and Space Force are forced to absorb a lot of risk in the near future as they try to keep delivery of out-year capabilities on track. For the Air Force, that means hundreds of aircraft are grounded on any given day due to insufficient funding for spare parts. It means divesting 130 aircraft in FY25 to save operating costs. And it means cutting the planned buys of new cutting-edge fighter aircraft. For the Space Force, it means delays in replacing legacy systems with more advanced and resilient systems. It means we're not making investments we need to replace current air missions with new, more survivable space-based platforms. And it means we're not acquiring the counter-space capabilities at the pace we need to fight and win in space. That's a problem because China's military modernization isn't slowing down. They've already outpaced us with a larger Navy. Soon, they'll have a larger Air Force. And in space, China is rapidly fielding new capabilities designed to prevent our joint force from operating. It's important to fully understand how much risk our services are taking on as a result of this budget and what that means for our ability to deter China, Russia, and our other adversaries. General Saltzman, I was glad to see the Space Force release its commercial space strategy. Since 2013, this committee has been consistent in urging the department to take more advantage of commercial space. Back then, it was just satellite communications, but in the last decade, we have seen an explosion of opportunities in the commercial space sector. In these times of limited budgets, leveraging those commercial resources will be even more important than it has been in the past. It will help us increase our capacity and our resiliency. I'm also interested in hearing more about the plan to move the core space mission from the Air Guard to the Space Force, especially how the plan will not cause Guard personnel and units to move out of affected states, and how the Space Force's new personnel system could benefit those Guardsmen who choose to not transfer. Finally, this committee will be closely monitoring progress on the modernization of our nuclear triad. While the B-21 and LRSO programs continue to make good progress, the Sentinel program's Nunn-McCurdy breach is very concerning. This committee understands how unique and challenging this program is. The Air Force hasn't undertaken a project like this since the deployment of the Minuteman in the 1960s. Nevertheless, the department must do more to anticipate challenges and overcome them early when they emerge. We need to get this right. As Chinese and Russian nuclear arsenals continue to grow, the need for a modern and flexible nuclear triad only becomes more acute. And with that, I yield to my friend, the ranking member, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the chairman did an excellent job of summarizing exactly the challenges in the area of our witnesses today. I want to thank the secretary and our two chiefs of staff joining us this morning. But I mean, the best way to sum it up, you have to modernize an incredibly tight budget environment. And I want to compliment all three of you for the work you've done to try to address that challenge, to really look at it holistically and make a big change to reflect the great power competition that you're facing, and what does that mean for how you need to develop the force going forward. And I know the budget environment makes that even more difficult, but that's what we have to do. Modernize within whatever budget is that is presented to us. So I think the leadership on that has been enormously helpful, and I appreciate that. And I want to just sort of foot stomp a couple of the points the chairman made. One, on the being able to divest of aging platforms that aren't serving our purposes anymore, that are driving costs. That's the only way we're going to be able to afford and to modernize in the way that we modernize. Also, do want to hear from you gentlemen about your personnel challenges. It's been a theme across the services. Recruitment has been difficult. We have our task force on quality of life issues that Don Bacon, Chrissy Houlihan did an outstanding job leading, that tries to present a better offer for our service members and to meet the challenges they face. But do want to hear how that's working within the Air Force and the Space Force. On the Space Force, it's just so crucial to everything we do. Information systems are the heart of literally everything we do in defense. And space is the linchpin of all of that. So I echo the chairman's remarks about how important it is to put up the best systems, develop our counter space capabilities, and crucially on the last point the chairman made on partnering with commercial entities. That is our great advantage in this country. Whatever the Chinese may be doing with their defense, they do not have our private industry or our level of innovation, even today. If we can partner with those innovative companies, with those new technologies, particularly in space and information systems, that gives us the ability to meet the rather steep challenges that we face. And lastly, I do want to also emphasize the last point on the nuclear problem. When we're looking at a tight budget and we're looking at the cost of the Sentinel program right now, I sincerely hope that as you're looking at the options, as is required when a Nunn-McCurdy breach happens, that you really aggressively look at all of the options. And just like with your modernization effort, you moved forward out of past thinking to say, okay, what are we facing today and how do we meet those challenges? I hope you do the same when you look at the future of our nuclear triad and where it makes sense to spend the money. Because all the money we're spending there could be spent to help deal with some of the challenges that you're facing in terms of updating the platforms and meeting our space needs and our air needs. So I hope you will consider that. With that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses today. We have the Honorable Frank Kendall, Secretary of the Air Force, General Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations, and General David Allvin is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Thank you all for being here. We will start with you, Secretary Kendall. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee. General Saltzman, General Allvin, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Department of the Air Force's FY25 budget submission. The Department of the Air Force budget submission supports the National Defense Strategy. We appreciate the committee's support for the FY24 NDAA and the recently enacted FY24 budget. Your efforts to secure timely passage are deeply appreciated. As you are aware, the 6-month delay has had a real impact. That time cannot be recovered, but at least we can now move forward with our urgent modernization priorities. As I've testified before this committee repeatedly, time is my greatest concern. We are in a race for military technological superiority with a capable pacing challenge. Our cushion is gone. We are out of time. As we have briefed the committee at a classified level, the pacing threat moves steadily forward. I want to go off script for a moment to make 2 points. One is I want to recognize the tremendous achievement of our Airmen and Guardians and our entire Joint Force and our partners over the weekend and engaging all of those targets that are on, all the systems that are on through at Israel. It was a remarkable accomplishment. I want to make one other point about it, though. What Iran encountered was a highly contested environment. And what we face with China is a highly contested environment. And what I'm dedicated to and what we are all dedicated to here is ensuring that the U.S. never has a result like Iran had in its attempt to attack Israel. That's what's driving a lot of what we're doing. That's why it's so important to move on from legacy systems that weren't designed for that type of environment to ones that are designed for it and are capable of coping with that. Continued failure to provide on-time authorities and appropriations will leave the Air Force and Space Force inadequately prepared. We know the committee recognizes this. We appreciate your strong bipartisan support. Our FY25 budget request complies with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We are requesting $217 billion for the Department of the Air Force, including $188 billion for the Air Force and $29 billion for the Space Force. The budget reflects an increase of about 1.5%, a little lower than you said, Chairman, over the enacted FY24 budget and does not keep pace with inflation, as you noted, or with the 7% publicly acknowledged growth of China's military budget. To stay within the levels of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the DAF had to adjust our previous plans. The DAF 25 budget request seeks to preserve the momentum behind our modernization efforts, particularly the work on operational imperatives that we initiated that this committee supported in FY24. In order to preserve modernization, we have marginally reduced procurement in the Air Force and have sustained our foundational accounts at levels we deemed acceptable, but no more. Because the Space Force budget is dominated by research and development accounts, we have had to marginally reduce the pace and scope of our Space Force modernization efforts. Our first priority in the National Defense Strategy remains defense of the homeland. The Department of the Air Force primarily supports through investments in domain awareness, air and space defense, early warning, and cyberspace defense programs. Our second priority is to deter strategic attacks against the United States, our allies, and our partners. The department budget request prioritizes nuclear modernization to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. Notably, the Sentinel ICBM program has experienced unacceptable cost and schedule increases and is currently undergoing a Nunn-McCurdy review. The Department of the Air Force will work closely with the committee as that review reaches its conclusions. The third priority is to deter aggression and be prepared to prevail in conflict when necessary. The Department of the Air Force needs immediate and significant capability modernization to keep pace with the growing military capabilities of the PRC. The DAF operational imperatives and the closely related cross-cutting operational enablers continue to guide our modernization program. Our budget request includes $6 billion for these efforts. Finally, the fourth National Defense Strategy priority is to build a resilient joint force and enduring advantages. This budget request invests to ensure that we can recruit and retain the force we need so that our airmen and guardians and their families have the quality of life they deserve and can serve to their full potential. As we have briefed the committee, the department is also currently undertaking a department-wide effort to re-optimize to meet the demands of great power competition. The intent is to minimize both cost impacts and personnel or unit movement under this initiative. We will work closely with the committee as we develop detailed plans. We do not anticipate any significant impact on the FY25 budget, and we have not requested funds for this purpose. The DAF also deeply appreciates the committee's support for the DoD Quick Start initiative that was enacted last year in the NDAA. The Department of the Air Force has obtained approval from the Secretary of Defense for 2 programs that will be initiated under this new authority. They are a more resilient national position navigation and timing capability and C3 battle management for moving target indication. Time matters, but so do resources. The United States is facing a competitor with national purchasing power that now exceeds our own, a challenge we have never faced in modern times. China is actively developing and expanding capabilities to challenge strategic stability, attack our critical space systems, and defeat our ability to protect power, especially air power. Conflict is not inevitable, but it could happen at any time. General Allvin and I just returned from a trip to some of our key bases in the Indo-Pacific. We should all be very proud of our men and women serving in harm's way and doing everything they can to deter and be ready for a conflict unlike any we've seen before. The DAF 25 budget is focused on addressing these realities. We commit to working with the committee to secure timely enactment of this budget. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Saltzman, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your continued support and for the opportunity to testify on the Space Force's posture for FY25. As the Space Force prepares to celebrate its 5th birthday, we are wholly dedicated to the work of forging a service purpose-built for great power competition. Space has never been more critical to the security of our nation, and the success or failure of the joint force depends heavily upon the capabilities we present. It is our responsibility to contest and control the domain, to defend U.S. space capabilities, and to protect the joint force from space-enabled attack. Gaining and maintaining space superiority is the purpose for which the Space Force was established. With about 3% of the Department of Defense budget, the Space Force offers a tremendous value proposition for the nation. Every dollar invested in space brings asymmetric returns, but that means every dollar cut creates asymmetric risk. Against a near-peer adversary, space superiority is the linchpin. Without it, we cannot deter conflict. Without it, we cannot provide vital effects. And without it, we cannot protect the joint force. Until we have built the infrastructure to achieve space superiority, the Space Force is a work in progress. The Space Force's theory of success includes 3 parts: avoiding operational surprise, denying the benefits of attack in space, and conducting responsible counterspace activities. The Space Force budget request is designed to support the National Defense Strategy by building, training, and equipping the forces the nation needs to perform each activity, preserving freedom of action in space while deterring and denying adversarial objectives. Avoiding operational surprise requires us to maintain an accurate understanding of the space domain at all times. 8.3% of our budget is dedicated to this aim. Operating across disaggregated sensor frameworks, the Space Force provides the maximum information possible to decision makers from the tactical to the strategic level. Denying the benefits of an attack in space demands that we make any attack against U.S. capabilities impractical and self-defeating. 43.4% of our budget is devoted to this objective, investing in resiliency for missile warning and tracking, satellite communications, position navigation and timing. Hybrid architectures and proliferated constellations impose a hefty cost on aggression. Finally, responsible counterspace activities describes the mechanism by which the Space Force contests and controls the space domain. The FY25 budget dedicates 24.7% of the Space Force budget to space superiority. Within the constraints of the FRA, fiscal year 25 Space Force budget reflects hard choices to maintain legacy space services, preserve current readiness, but it also slows the fielding of a modernized force. Addressing these challenges depends on Guardians that are trained and ready to meet high-tech demands of space operations. For that reason, I would like to personally thank the committee for its support for the Space Force Personnel Management Act. This will be a major force multiplier in the Space Force's efforts to modernize the way we recruit, build, and retain talent. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Space Force's FY25 budget and posture. And even in the face of accelerating threats, the Space Force remains the preeminent military space organization in the world. And with the support of this committee, our Guardians will preserve and expand our strategic advantage, and we will step up to meet our pacing challenge. So long as you continue to trust and invest in your space service, the Space Force will respond with unparalleled value for the nation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Saltzman. General Allvin, you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of this committee. Today, I'm proud to represent the 677,000 total force airmen serving our nation. I want to thank you for your unyielding support, not only to those airmen, but to their families as well. I'd like to open by stating my immense pride in the exemplary performance of our airmen this past weekend. As part of a joint and coalition effort, they successfully thwarted the massive air attack by Iran on Israel's home soil. Their professionalism and skill turned a potentially catastrophic event for Israel into a strategic defeat for Iran and its proxies. As we look across the strategic landscape, we find ourselves in a time of significant consequence. The simultaneous demands of strategic competition with an aggressive and increasingly capable PRC and the persistent acute threats from around the globe require the Air Force to maximize the readiness of today's forces while adapting our structures and processes to offer the best opportunity to prevail in an environment of enduring great power competition. Time is not on our side. The FY25 Air Force budget reflects difficult choices. We've made trade-offs to keep the Air Force's operational readiness today at the minimum acceptable to meet the nation's demands while seeking to preserve the previous advances in modernization. The Air Force budget also invests in the Air Force's most precious asset, its airmen, to ensure they remain the decisive advantage upon which the nation depends. Strategic deterrence is a key priority for our national defense strategy, and the United States Air Force remains committed to the recapitalization of our nuclear force. We are actively supporting the process triggered by the Nunn-McCurdy breach of the Sentinel program and will continue to pursue the path of a safe, secure, reliable, and effective ground leg of the nuclear triad well into the future. Our ability to support the national defense strategy priority of deterring aggression and prevailing in conflict demands a modern Air Force that is connected to the Joint Force and can close multiple kill chains in minimal time to control the tempo of a complex fight with a peer competitor. To that end, the FY25 proposal continues investments in the F-35 and the F-15EX, albeit with fewer than preferred quantities dictated by the constraints of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We remain committed to the Advanced Battle Management System and the Next Generation Air Dominance family of systems, particularly collaborative combat aircraft, which will allow the Air Force to deliver the affordable mass required to be effective against a very capable PRC. We're also committed to building forward basing resilient enough to enable continued sortie generation even under attack. To arrest the decline in our readiness, we have proposed modest increased investments in flying hours and the weapons system sustainment funding to support them, while prioritizing investments in critical infrastructure in both physical and cyber. Our airmen are and always will be the decisive factor in any conflict our Air Force faces, and we are committed to their health, development, and quality of life. We have made significant progress thanks to Congress's support to increase base pay, adjust basic allowance for housing and subsistence to account for macroeconomic factors. But there's still work to be done. During our recent trip to the Indo-Pacific, Secretary Kendall and I saw dedicated airmen eager to accomplish their mission, despite infrastructure degradation caused by natural disaster and persistent environmental challenges, as well as limited access to health care enjoyed by most CONUS bases. The job of your Air Force has not changed since its inception. Support the defense of this nation through credible deterrence and unmatched combat prowess. To preserve that level of deterrence, we must maintain our readiness today, modernize our force for tomorrow, and provide the absolute best support to our airmen. Success on any battlefield is a team effort. So I want to thank members of Congress and this committee for your past and continued support. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank all the witnesses for their statements and I recognize myself for questions. Secretary Kendall and the others can pitch in if they want to, but we've talked about the tight fiscal top line and that there's going to be the risk that you have to assume making these numbers work, particularly when it comes to our ability to effectively deter China, Russia, and Iran. Can you talk briefly about some of the risks that you're assuming with this?
Yeah, I outlined it in my opening comment a little bit, but first thing is that we have the most powerful military in the world, and we're going to continue to have the most powerful military in the world. So we are able to meet the requirements of our combatant commanders and provide them forces that they would need, both in normal operations and in a contingency. But that's being challenged, of course, by China in particular. And that's a lot for us to do simultaneously. There are a lot of commitments the United States has around the world. So we have, basically what we have done under the constraints of the Fiscal Responsibility Act is to fund the current force, personnel with an adequate raise, maintaining quality of life for people, maintaining the force structure basically that we have at a level which we think is acceptable risk, a floor below which we really do not want to go. That leaves us with a certain amount of resources for modernization, and modernization is divided between procurement and research and development. So there's the force you have, which we have at the level where we can accept the risk. We're taking a little bit of risk in procurement. We're scaling that back modestly from what we had previously planned in order to get on with the modernization, the R&D part of the budget, which we have to get to remain competitive. I see the risk increasing significantly over time. I've watched China modernize for about 20 years now. They're building a military designed to defeat the United States. That is the purpose of their military. And we have got to respond to that, and we've got to do it aggressively and as fast as we can. So from my perspective, getting that modernization funded and moving it forward is the highest priority. But in the meantime, we have to take care of the current force, and we do need to recapitalize at a reasonable rate to address the midterm risk. So that's overall the balance that we're trying to strike.
Thank you. General Saltzman, I understand there are approximately 580 Air National Guardsmen in 6 states in D.C. that currently perform the federal space mission for the Space Force under Title X authority. I understand the administration proposes to transfer these personnel to the Space Force. Is it accurate that under your proposal, these 580 personnel will have the option to transfer to the Space Force? If they transfer, they will still report to the same duty station. No units will be removed out of the effective state, and choosing to transfer could provide these guardsmen with a better system of benefits under the Space Force's new hybrid personnel structure.
Thank you, Chairman, for that question, and it is true. I think the best way to take care of these missions and the people that are currently doing them in the Air National Guard is to integrate them into the Space Force. With the authorities granted by Congress through the SFPMA, we now have the ability to manage part-time personnel. And when I evaluate the missions that are currently in the Air National Guard, there's no reason to change those unit structures, the personnel, the makeup of part-time to be seamless from a mission standpoint and from a personnel standpoint.
Great. General, I'm interested in hearing how you plan to put into action the new commercial space strategy, and specifically how you plan to change the requirements process so that the commercial products and services are fully considered.
Thank you again. We're excited about the commercial space strategy. As we've known for a long time, it's one of our asymmetric advantages in the U.S. is the power of innovation and that engine of ingenuity that's in the commercial industry, and especially in space in this time. And so we wrote the commercial space strategy around 4 lines of effort intended to get the most out of it. Trying to create more collaborative transparency. We have to know what the commercial offerings are. in order to take advantage of them. And the commercial industry has to understand what our challenges are to best prioritize where they invest and how they can present capabilities to us for inclusion into our architectures. Operational and technical integration. We can't just think about this purely as adding capacity. We have to start thinking about them as filling some gaps and being fully integrated, both technically and operationally, into our systems. The third line of effort is risk management. We have to understand what we should preserve organically as inherently governmental services. We don't want to miss on those no-fail missions, and so we're taking a very deliberate approach to assuring we pull the right kinds of capabilities in. And then lastly, we have to secure the future. There's so much work being done looking out into the future about what space could offer. And so we want to make sure we're prioritizing our S&T dollars to go after the highest payoff technologies across the industry to fill gaps in the future for the Space Force.
Great. Thank you. I yield time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot to ask about. I'm just going to focus on one set of questions in a moment, but I really want to emphasize what Secretary Kendall said in the opening. I think what we saw in the Iranian attack on Israel is a really good way to frame your challenge and the broader challenge of the overall military, which is we have to make sure that whatever we have can actually get in and hit our targets while at the same time defending against it. And that is an incredibly complex web, as we saw. I mean, we had jet fighters up there taking out some of the missiles. Electronic warfare is a huge part of this, blocking signals, using drones. It's incredibly complicated, and it's all about staying one step ahead with the technology. So to General Saltzman's point on the last thing about, using our innovative capabilities to do that, that's what we're trying to invest in and where we really need to put our focus. The one thing I want to drill down on, in full disclosure, Mr. Garamendi cannot be here today, which I know breaks your heart. But he asked on his behalf that I drill down a little bit, and also I am genuinely concerned about it, on the Sentinel program. When we're looking at the budget challenges that we have, and I share the chairman's frustration, but at the same time, we have $1 trillion deficit. We have a $33 trillion debt. We have to live within the budget we have. Does the triad still make sense, given the amount of money that is going to have to go into re-upping? And in short of that, are there alternatives that could be less costly? Because I believe the Nunn-McCurdy breach has the Sentinel program roughly $35 to $40 billion over budget. I would ask you the leading question, what could you do with $40 billion? But I won't, because I know you could do a lot with it. But as you look at this, I hope you seriously consider what is the true value of the land-based leg of the triad, and what's it going to cost to try to maintain that? Is there a more cost-effective way to do that? And Secretary Kendall, General Allvin, I'd like you both to comment on that.
Yeah, first of all, I am recused on the program because of a prior industry association, but I can talk about the triad in general.
Yeah.
I did have an opportunity to talk to Congressman Garamendi at length about this the other day, so we had a preamble for this. The triad has served us well for many decades. It has kept us from a nuclear war for a very long time. You cannot put a price tag on that. The ICBM leg of the triad is the most responsive leg of the triad. It is probably what you try to do with the triad is force an adversary to confront a problem for which there is no easy solution. If you take out one leg, there are two other legs. Even if you take out two legs, the third leg still has a lot of destructive power that you can't ignore. And the three legs have different characteristics. The submarines have good stealth characteristics and good survivability because of that. The bombers have more flexibility in terms of how they're used. And the ICBMs are on alert and ready to go in large numbers at a moment's notice. That combination presents a very difficult problem to an adversary. And again, it has serviced well. The other part of your question about alternatives, I did the Milestone A decision for Sentinel, and we knew there was widespread uncertainty about the cost at the time. Now that uncertainty is sort of coming home to confront us now. When a program has a 50% cost increase, you have to go relook at the value proposition. And the Nunn-McCurdy process requires us to do that. I'm not directly involved. Undersecretary LaPlante is running that, and my undersecretary and acquisition executive are participating in it. I do think we have to be open-minded about the alternatives.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you to drill down on just one thing. I got that point. I may not get to General Allen, but on your triad argument, I don't find that overwhelmingly persuasive. Okay, If we have 3 legs, we're better off. Well, why not 4 or 5? Okay, yes, the more legs you have, theoretically, the better off you are. That doesn't necessarily answer the question of why this particular leg in this particular situation actually puts us in a better position to defend when it is stationary and just a big fat target. So we got to do better than just saying, well, the more legs, the better. Well, at a certain point, no. So we've got to get a more specific answer, and I think General Allvin wants to dive in here. Why is this leg helpful, other than just being another leg?
The risk of a preemptive surprise attack that decapitates us or takes out our nuclear force becomes much higher if there's no ICBM link. If the stealth of the submarines is broken and the bombers are caught on their bases, you don't have anything left. I'm an old Cold Warrior. I spent 20 years working on this problem. We've looked at tons of scenarios. We've looked at all sorts of different opportunities and possibilities. The triad provides the most stable configuration. And it would be, I think, a lot of risk, more risk than we should accept to take that.
I am out of time. I want to respect the chairman. I apologize, General Allvin. You and I can talk about this offline. Thank you.
Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, as I was happy to meet with each of you as we came in, always I like to point out my appreciation of the Air Force. I grew up with that. My dad was in the Flying Tigers, the 14th Air Force. He served in India. He served in China, Kunming, Chengdu, Xi'an. I was really grateful to grow up in the shadow of Charleston Air Force Base. And so anytime I visit the Holy City, it's always uplifting to see the number of aircraft there and around the world. Additionally, I'm very grateful with Congressman Jim Clyburn, Congressman Ralph Norman, that I represent adjacent bases, the Joint Air Base McEntire at Eastover, South Carolina, and Shaw Air Force Base, of course, in Sumter, South Carolina. And so your service to me is very, very important and significant, and I see it firsthand. With that, I share the concerns of Chairman Mike Rogers, and that is, Secretary Kendall, the legislative proposal 480 effectively does an end run on the gubernatorial authority for consent over the transfer of their National Guard units. Your proposal disregards the governor's purview to make the best decisions for their state, setting precedent for federal overreach on Guard issues for years to come. As a 31-year Guard veteran myself, I know that you can count on the Guard as it operates effectively today. With this, would your proposal allow the department to relocate Guard assets without the approval of state governors? And if so, does this not waive the federal law requiring gubernatorial approval before any modification of Guard units and assets within their jurisdiction?
Thank you for your question. First of all, the Guard is enormously important to us. I've gotten to know the Guard. I was a reservist in the Army. I've gotten to know the Guard much better in this position, and I've come to really value the contribution they make to national security. Very professional, very capable force. This issue of this very small number, it turns out to be between 500 and 600 of people out of over 100,000 people in the Guard that we need to integrate with the Space Force more fully. We created the Space Force as a very small organization designed to take on the role of a service, which is a very big thing to ask it to do. And it needs to be as lean and as tightly structured as possible so that it can do those functions. Just last year, this committee supported the Space Force Personnel Management Act, which took the reservists who were space people and is now in the process of moving them into the Space Force as part-time or full-time Space Force people. That process is going very smoothly. We need to do the same thing for the very small number of people that are in the Guard that are in the same situation, to give unity of command, if you will, to the Space Force and to allow them to manage that small number of people, only about 10,000 total, as effectively as possible to do their very important mission. The reaction from the Guard, quite frankly, has been over the top on this. I mean, I read an article this morning by the head of the Guard Foundation that this was an existential threat to the Guard. We're talking 500 and plus people here. We're not talking an existential threat. No one is suggesting dismantling the Guard. This is a sui generis, a de minimis exception to our norm, and it's necessary to make the Space Force effective as it needs to be. I'm sorry this has become such a politicized issue. It should be a very straightforward issue, frankly.
We love the Space Force. In fact, I want to give Chairman Mike Rogers credit that it exists. but the precedence of moving guard units without the governors being in approval is a real concern. And General Allvin, I'm grateful to represent the Savannah River site, where a significant amount of plutonium pits for our nation's nuclear deterrence are produced. And we know we need to upgrade these, and they haven't been upgraded for like 60 years. And so we have a two-site solution with Los Alamos. And we know that China is conducting the largest military buildup in peacetime history. What is the significance of any delay of our plutonium pit production?
Well, actually, I will yield on the technical nature of that to the NNSA and others, but I think anytime we are looking at modernizing our nuclear force, any delays to that, I can't give you a specific, but it certainly would degrade our ability to modernize. I can't put the specifics on it. I have to yield to NNSA to that, but delays are bad.
Well, indeed, hey, it's deterrence that we need, and that's exactly what each of you are providing, and with the leadership of Chairman Rogers and our other colleagues, even the ranking member, we are working together on behalf of our country for you. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses. Secretary Kendall, you've talked quite a bit publicly about sort of the challenge right now we have with early warning platforms. The E3s are getting old. The economic business case for extending them is pretty weak. The E7 is a really promising, more than promising replacement. Australia is already flying them. I think we're selling some already to the UK, sort of where AUKUS is now in a situation where the other two countries are ahead of us. Is there something this committee can do to help accelerate, either through multi-year authorities or AP, to sort of get the timeline shorter so that we can start fielding these E7s?
Where we are with E7 is that we're still in negotiations with the prime contractor to try to get to an affordable price that we think is reasonable. We're getting closer. I'm hopeful that we will get there soon. As a result of those negotiations going on longer than anticipated, we've taken one E7 out of the budget and slipped it a year. It's one of the cuts in procurement this year, driven more by the fact that we couldn't get to an acceptable business deal. I think the odds are pretty good that we will get there, hopefully in the not too distant future. We have looked at ways to try to accelerate the program. I spent some time with the program office on that personally. Because of I'd have to go into a lot more detail than we have time for, but because of the way the program is structured, it's very hard to find ways to remove schedule from the program. It is an important program. It plays very well in our wargaming and make a contribution. It has a lot more capability than the AWACS does. The other thing that's happening in that world in general, though, is the shift towards more dependency on space. We're also moving forward with moving target indicators, primarily for surface targets, ground targets right now, but also at some point for airborne targets as well. What the threat is doing is reaching out to longer and longer ranges to engage particularly our high-value aircraft like an AWACS or an E7 or a JSTARS type of aircraft. And we have to respond to that. And part of the response to that is to move some of that capability into space and have a mix of capabilities to confront an adversary with.
Well, anything, the offer stands, in terms of if there's ways that we can help, through the acquisition authorities, we're definitely on standby. Following the Air Force Special Operations Command V-22 Osprey crash off the coast of Japan in November of last year, we've had some pretty extensive briefings on the state of the investigation and what the joint services have decided as a course of action. I understand there may be a new set of inspection standards and processes to ensure safety precautions are taken into account prior to flight. I would just say I think it's really important that when the time comes when the Air Force and the other services sort of roll out the plan, and then they're back sort of authorized to fly again, I just think it's really important, and I think you understand this, just to have as strong a public message about the fact that we're going to do things differently to make the confidence in this program. And I just wonder if you could comment on that.
General Allvin should comment also, but we're both in contact with General Barnfine, the commander of our Special Operations Forces, and he has a very thoughtful, thorough process in place, including public interface, as he works his way through getting the aircraft back in the air. They're cleared to fly again, but he's working through a process of ensuring that every one of those aircraft is individually ready to go and doesn't have a problem, and that's taking a bit of time. I think the other services are moving forward as well, maybe a little bit more quickly than we are, but the SOF aircraft, the Special Operations Forces aircraft, fly in a more difficult environment than the Marine Corps in many cases, or the Navy aircraft. So we're being a little more cautious even than the other services are. Do you want to add anything? Yes.
The Secretary pretty much handled it, but to the point of the differences in mission, that's something that we shouldn't walk past. I mean, the difference between how the Marine Corps and the Navy operate their V-22 aircraft and how AFSOC does, a lot of these more complex. It's not only more complex and perhaps challenging to the airframe, but also to the aircrew as well. So understanding that entire system and ensuring that that is safe and effective is General Bauernfein's, it's his number one remit. I think he's doing a fantastic job, but your point, Congressman, is exactly right. As we get that rolled out, what we need to do is ensure that we rebuild that confidence and have a defensible, clear message that says what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and also be able to define the differences between the three different services to show that they're not inconsistent, even though they may not be on the exact same time
I mean, that's what the Navy did with McCain and Fitzgerald afterwards. And again, I think that you can see, that really worked in terms of just there was a change in process. And I think, again, there's a lot more confidence in how destroyers are being deployed. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Secretary Kendall, I'd like to begin with you. The U.S. Air Force base budget and then the UCOM unfunded requirements list both call for additional counter small UAS capability at U.S. Air Force installations. As I see things unfolding, we see counter small UAS and really loitering munitions not having much distinction. They are becoming the same thing. We saw recently a very disturbing trend at Langley Air Force Base where because of a large number of UASs that were in that airspace, Langley had to close down just to make sure that we were able to defend the operations that were going on there. As I watch how missions are developing, you see the Army Missile Defense Mission, you see the Air Force Air Base Air Defense Mission, and it looks like to me that there's a lot of commonalities there. Can you give me an idea about how do you look at those different requirements and who's responsible for what mission? Are there clear lines of distinction there? And do you think that based upon where we are today, are our Air Force bases adequately protected?
We have a wide range of threats to our air bases. They vary by theater quite a bit. Different in the Middle East or in Europe or in the Pacific. In the Pacific in particular, what China's been acquiring is a variety of missiles, precision missiles, ballistic and cruise and hypersonic, designed to attack our air bases. And that's the threat that really drives us more than anything else right now. In the Middle East and to some extent in Europe, we're faced with small UAVs more. We have to deal with all of these. The way the department is approaching this is that the Army is generally the lead for research and development on small UAV problem, and we're participating in that. We contribute to that and are full-fledged members. And we are funding some improvements to our air bases for security of that. I was just at several of our Middle East air bases where we have systems deployed today because of that threat. As you go up the chain a little bit in the threat and start worrying about cruise and ballistic missiles, then systems like Patriot come into play. What we need, and there's a large study that's been going on for well over a year now, led by the Army that we're participating in, to try to come to an optimal solution for air-based defense against a whole range of threats. What we need in particular is a highly cost-effective way to engage those cruise and ballistic missiles and those hypersonics. Yeah. And there's some promising technologies in development which we think have potential to do that. We will have to make some decisions in the department about force structure and what our priorities are to acquire those. But I think it's an important part of air-based resilience that we have to address. Our whole concept of operation in the Pacific is called agile combat employment, which assumes that we don't stay on a single base to absorb missile attacks. We move around to different bases and make it harder for the other guy. But you still need defenses, and you need defenses that can be where you're going to be to be effective. All our wargaming says that's a necessity. So we're not where we need to be yet, but we're on the path, hopefully, to get there.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Saltzman, I wanted to get your perspective, because today what we're seeing is a massively increasing capability on the commercial side of space. That's a good thing. There's lots of constellations going up in different orbits, lots of different capabilities there. And that commercial capability, to me, seems to be a perfect opportunity to augment the capacity and capability and mass that we have on the military side of things. In fact, I think that actually has to be codified because I think it's that important for the future of the United States Space Force and our space assets. Can you speak to the importance of the CASR program, the Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve Program, how you see it today, what you think the future is for that, and what do you think needs to go into the structure of that to make sure we can capture the incredible things that are happening on the commercial side of space and do that at the speed of relevance?
Thank you, Congressman. I couldn't agree with you more. We definitely need to leverage what's available to us in the commercial industry for space. The CASR program, I think, is a classic example where we've used this in the Air Force prior to it. And the idea is about how rapidly can we expand and augment our capabilities in time of crisis or conflict. And as you know, a lot of the pre-work, the planning, how will we integrate the contractual work that needs to be done with the companies to make sure that we're primed to execute at the speed of need is really what is at the heart of the CASR program. Do the work ahead of time, account for it in planning, see what the requirements are, which of those requirements can be met by the commercial industry, and then start talking about contract negotiations before we even actually sign a contract so that we are ready and primed to put that excess capacity in place when we need it.
Very good.
Gentleman's
Thank you,
time's
Chairman.
expired.
You're back.
Chair now recognizes gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In addition to my district being home to some of the best wines in the world, it is also home to Vandenberg Space Force Base, the West Coast Range. There has been a rapid growth in the commercial space industry, especially with the increased launch cadence at both Space Force ranges. General Saltzman and Secretary Kendall, does the increase in commercial launch cadence benefit our national security, even when those rockets are not carrying DoD payloads?
I'll start with a yes and turn it over to General Saltzman to give you more details, Congressman.
Absolutely, Congressman. You know that the more we use the infrastructure, the more we can offset and defray some of the costs associated with, especially with on the commercial side. As we use the commercial launch facilities, they continue to develop the rocket technologies, the launch technologies. We enhance the experience and the competencies of all of those that operate the range, do the spacecraft integration that's necessary for launch. And in the end, the real benefit is the more you launch, the more we are driving the cost per pound to orbit down. And this is one of the most beneficial things that the commercial industry has done for us in the launch enterprise, is drive that cost to orbit down so that we can start to explore different kinds of constellations in different orbits to do different kinds of missions.
Thank you. That question was important because in California, I know there's permitting decision-making that is going on right now, and the national security issue can't be further underscored. That's why I asked you that question. Thank you so much. The increased cadence will result in bottleneck unless additional payload processing is added to the range infrastructure. General Saltzman, the fiscal year 24 budget included $80 million for a payload processing facility that is supposed to go to Vandenberg. Can you provide an update on this project, including any timelines involved?
I can get back to you on the specifics, but I haven't heard anything that says there's any delays or that the money's not being spent. But I'll get back to you specifically.
Great, thank you so much. I was really pleased to see the Space Force commercial space strategy was finally released. I think this is a great roadmap for better leveraging our nation's space industry. General Saltzman, how does the CSS work in coordination or build on the commercial space office? And does fiscal year 25 budget requests help build out commercial integration capabilities as outlined in the CSS?
Thank you again. In addition to the standard services that we've been buying for years, satellite communications, we have about $1.2 billion in the budget. Launch services is about $2.2 billion. But we've added about $400 million to bring some non-traditional kinds of data and services to bear. The commercial space office, commercial services office, that's the one who's kind of the front door to collaborate with industry and figure out what is the best military utility for these commercial services. And I think we're on a good path. Commercial space office falls under SSC, so they have the lead to explore That's what, when we say collaborative transparency in the commercial space strategy, that's what we're talking about. Getting out with industry, figuring out what services are most beneficial to the government, and working closely with them to fill gaps and expand our capacity.
Thank you. General Saltzman, one last question for you. With the proliferation of the commercial LEO constellations, it should be easier than ever to get to tactical surveillance, reconnaissance, and tracking data out to the combat commands and warfighters. I believe this service is the Space Force should be providing. How will CSS help get TAC SRT into the hands of combat commands, and what challenges do you expect to run into while integrating this commercial capability?
Again, I couldn't agree more with you. There's a lot of capacity, a lot of capability that's available to us in this SRT mission area. SSC has a number of demos that are going on right now to explore exactly the best way to spend our dollars on those capabilities. And the Joint Commercial Office is also exploring how best to incorporate space data into our overall architecture. Again, with the focus on meeting those combatant commander requirements that sometimes can't be met through a normal intelligence process. Operational planning products that don't require the level of analytics that traditional intelligence products do. There's a lot of room for improvement there, and SSC is dedicated to getting that.
Great. Secretary Kendall, I look forward to you visiting Vandenberg Space Force Base in the near future with General Saltzman. Look forward to hosting you and showing you not only paradise, but the great capabilities at Vandenberg Space Force Base.
I think I'll try the wine also, Senator.
We'll have some good wine for you as well. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kendall, I know that the decision has been made on the A-10s, and that, as I understand it, we're going to divest 56 aircraft this coming year. And my question is, are we talking with other countries, whether they be NATO partners or treaty countries, that may be interested in that aircraft to transfer it to them?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any active interest. One country at least has expressed some interest, but the problem is once that aircraft goes out of the U.S. inventory, there won't be any base of support for it. So any country that picked it up and tried to sustain it would have a very hard time. It's also a very old aircraft. They're about 45 years old.
They are.
Replacement parts are very hard to obtain.
They're old, but they're effective. But as we look to divest things, it seems to me like there's a whole lot going on around the world where I understand we're moving in a different direction, more technically advanced, but you know, it would have sure been nice for Ukraine to have them 2 years ago.
Ukraine hasn't expressed much interest. I think they rightfully are to be concerned about their survivability.
I agree, but I think if they'd had them 2 years ago, it may have made a difference. I would just suggest that as we divest things, we're running a $3 trillion deficit over the last 365 days. We're now $34 trillion. As we divest things, I understand it's the right decision for the U.S., but globally, I think we need to be at least meeting with other people that share our interests and our values. And while it might not be the right weapon system for us, it's certainly better than the systems that they had.
We'd be perfectly happy to have those conversations. We do transfer excess defense articles. We just transferred some C-130s, for example, to the Philippines, which they're very appreciative of.
Sure. So one of the other aircraft that's been divested is the J-STARS from Robins Air Force Base. I think the last one left in November of 23. General Allvin, the ABMS system is going to take its place, and then some. What are your goals for ABMS? Are you staying on track with the timeline? What can we do to help with the Air Force mission and the ABMS mission at Robins Air Force Base?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Congressman. I would say that the advancement in the advanced battle management system, and really across what we're referring to as the C3 battle management, has really started to accelerate, largely due to something Secretary Kendall did maybe a year and a half ago now, with the putting an integrator in across all those systems that's putting together the architecture. It's a complicated thing. But when you put it together, having all of the architecture, understanding what the pipes are, what the nodes are, and how it all fits together, and for it to have the ability to work with the other services, so it can truly integrate into the joint environment. That is where we've been making progress. We are now seeing some instantiations of that. We are seeing in the Homeland Defense area, some of the cloud-based command and control is now moving to 4 or 5 different defense sectors. We are deploying, I believe we have now as many as 20 this year of these distributable air battle management nodes. So this idea of moving to a distributed architecture to do what we had done before is progressing along. There will continue to be bumps along the road, but I feel very confident in General Cropsey and the team that he has, mixing the technical folks with the operators side by side, step by step, to ensure that we build this once right the first time.
Just one suggestion. I am concerned that there's not enough dialogue across the different branches with ABMS and the intent and the use of it. I had the discussion with some people in the Army that would be dependent upon it, and they were not aware of the system, and that would just be my suggestion, that we need to be.
Yeah, Congressman, I couldn't agree more. And I would say that their convergence and the Navy's overmatch, we are certainly partnering with them. We probably, you can't communicate on enough. But I would say across services, and I would, look over to my sister service over here in the Space Force. That's where we're building the DAF battle network. It's not just.
I'm talking about people that wear green more than
absolutely,
more than blue.
And they are solving different problems. They're looking at different solving a single kill chain, but they have to be integrated. Congressman, you're exactly right.
Well, people at the Ranger Regiment were not very familiar with the program, is my concern, and they're obviously, all of the branches are going to be dependent on it. So with that, I yield. I appreciate all of you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, Secretary and Generals, for joining us today. Yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, we had a very similar hearing, but with Army. And at the beginning, our chairman and ranking member and many of us during the course of the hearing asked appropriate questions about the President's supplemental that's now been sort of on the back burner for the better part of 6 months, and the impact and implication of not having passed it yet, and the impact and implication of when it does hopefully pass at some point to you all. I would ask the same question because I'm sort of surprised that I'm one of the junior chipmunks here, that it hasn't come up yet. What are your thoughts about the President's supplemental and its urgency? What is not happening because it hasn't happened, and what will happen if it does happen?
I can give you a quick response, but I think we got 2 members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff here, and I think you should hear from them. I watch this obviously very closely. We're very heavily engaged in support to Ukraine in particular. They desperately need the help. And we look at the numbers and the way they're exhausting air defense weapons and artillery munitions and so on. They need the help. The war right now is not going in the right direction. It's largely because they haven't gotten that assistance. So the supplemental is needed there. It's also needed for Israel, and it's needed for Taiwan. So it's a very important package and it needs to be passed. I'm going to let my colleagues talk about their perspectives.
Well, we certainly, with the impact of being able to reimburse some of the munitions and the things that we have supplied, we look very closely as the request comes for different types of munitions to ensure that we don't deplete our own stockpiles. But in that, every time we do that, we incur a little bit more risk, but we understand this is part of integrated deterrence. Integrated deterrence is being able to support our partners, and so we do not have to commit to, in the case of Ukraine, an Article 5 sort of situation. So we from a pure service perspective, we are very interested in, if the supplemental were to be passed, we would be able to replenish some of those, or have maybe newer munition stocks with those. There's some monies that we're looking for with the Presidential Drawdown Authority that we are doing some sort of cash flowing, and if we don't get that, then we're going to have to make some decisions at the end of the year with respect to readiness. I know the Army probably yesterday had more to say. They are doing quite a bit of cash flowing as well, and I've talked very closely to my counterpart, Randy George, and they also have issues with their risk towards the end of the year in the operation and maintenance accounts if they don't get the supplemental pass.
Thank you.
They've covered the topic pretty well. I would just add that sometimes we get caught up in the tactical side of things and munitions and replenishment, but there's some strategic messaging here too, as well as withdrawing our support. So I think we have to consider it all from tactical all the way up through strategical.
100%, and thank you, gentlemen, for that response. Transitioning into my fear, which is my fear that if we don't do the right thing here, the implications for us and for our troops could be catastrophic. And speaking about our troops and the quality of life of them and the recruiting and retention of them, I'm one of the people who participates, in fact, the ranking member of the Quality of Life panel, and we've just put out quite a big report on that and looking forward very enthusiastically to working on you on the various pillars that are provided there and suggestions listed there. Very briefly in the time I have left, there were 5 categories, not surprisingly: service member pay, spouse employment, child care, housing, and health care. Very quickly, if you wouldn't mind mentioning kind of which one of those resonates most with you at this point in time, and how you're currently prioritizing the funding in that area.
The department's looking at it. Just came out recently. I had a chance to look at it also. A couple of things we are doing are reflected in our 25 budget. The 200% of poverty for basic needs allowance, for example. We obviously support that. The one that I think we're going to look at very closely is the 15% pay raise for junior enlisted. We have given a 15% pay raise over the last few years when you add the totals to the last few years. When you look at how resources could be applied to influence quality of life for our people, we think there may be some more efficient ways to do that, to utilize those same funds. So anyway, I know there'll be a conversation between you and the department as we look at this in more detail and get back to you. So that's just preliminary reactions.
Also resonating with me is, of course, the housing issues as well. And I think we are making progress on that. I saw some of the recommendations. I also have to fully digest and to be able to advise the Secretary. I think we are, I don't want to compare it to other services. I think we have leaned a little bit more further forward. I think there's ways to go, though, as well. That's one that resonates with me. Is as we understand the fluctuation in housing, this is really a partnership. We cannot afford, nor do I think you want to have the military supplying housing for all of its members. And so being able to have a closer communication with the communities to be able to adjust to those macroeconomic factors faster than we do now, I think is going to be key, because I think
Gentleman's time's expired.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I yield.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Kendall. The Department of the Air Force published the assessment of the Air Force Test Center in 2022, which found that $300 million of facilities, sustainment, restoration, modernization projects have not been funded. Can you describe the impact and operational risk associated with such an extensive backlog, and how would failure of our critical test infrastructure impact modernization efforts for everything from Sentinel to hypersonics to F-35 upgrades?
We are managing the risk associated with our installations at a level which we think is acceptable, but it's not great. I look at that as we look at we have the foundational accounts that we fund, including facilities. We're funding, I think, at 1.6% of replacement cost. We'd like to be at 2%. What that leads to is slow deterioration. And eventually you end up doing emergency repairs only in some of our installations. Another very salient fact there is that we have about 20% excess capacity in our installations in terms of real estate holdings. So we have the burden of having to carry that. And I know that there's no interest in a BRAC from this body, but we do need to take a look more fundamentally, frankly, at our installation posture and try to address it as a whole.
Okay. Last year, in response to the issue outlined in the assessment of the Air Force Test Center, Congress increased FSRM by roughly $30 million above the President's budget. His budget request in order to start chopping away at that $300 million backlog and to ensure that the infrastructure was well positioned to support future endeavors. Would you support a similar increase this year?
I'm in support of the President's budget. I think our request is within the FRA, and we basically have given the Congress a balanced set of investments across the department, taking everything into consideration.
Yeah. General Saltzman, I would like to commend the department for the work that you have all done to unleash private industry to further national security interests in the space domain. Watching the progress made over just the past decade has been incredible. However, not all the elements of the federal government appear to be on the same page when it comes to this issue. I constantly hear from your industry partners that they are being burdened with the slow-moving bureaucracy, be it through environmental studies with EPA or launch reentry licenses through the FAA. How are you working with other agencies to ensure that they are working as quickly as you all are to support the critical work that Space Force is supporting?
We're intimately engaged with all of those agencies. The speed of licensing is something I hear routinely from industry. And so we reach out every time we hear this. We try to figure out exactly where the bottleneck is, or exactly where a policy can be shifted to try to streamline the licensing aspect of it. So we're working closely with our interagency partners.
Okay. Staying on the topic of space, I wanted to get your thoughts on NSSL. The NSSL Phase 3 is a long-term strategy that will help shape the space industry over the next decade. At the same time, new buzzing around a potential ULA sale has created some uncertainty in the short term and will certainly impact the Space Force's calculus. How does the department view a potential sale or merger of a major launch provider in awarding Phase 3 bids?
Well, you know, the strategy itself is all about assured access to space, maximizing the number of providers to minimize the risk associated with losing assured access to space. I'm very pleased with the Phase 3 strategy, that it has on-ramps and off-ramps so that we can pull people in when they're ready to support the launch enterprise. And I think that having that flexibility in the strategy can account for any shifts in the market.
Okay. And for Secretary Kendall and General Allvin, I wanted to give you both the opportunity to share an update from the Aero test last month at Reagan Test Site. What did you all learn from this test?
The test was successful. We are evaluating what to do with Aero and what the future of our hypersonic portfolio will be overall. And we'd have to go to a classified setting to talk about that, Congressman.
You know, we heard last year that the program was dead. Is it moving forward? What can we expect to see in the future?
We'd have to talk about that in a classified session.
Okay. I yield.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Lutkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the point, Secretary Kendall, in your remarks, or ahead of your remarks, about the importance of contesting the airspace, being prepared for the events we saw last weekend. And I couldn't agree more about our need to contest the space when it comes to the potential threat from China. And as you know, now Chairman C.Q. Brown said in front of this committee that China could achieve air superiority over the United States and allied air forces as soon as 2035. So you're right to raise it. My questions, unsurprisingly to you, will connect back to my home state of Michigan. And just to review the bidding, you know, we got word that the Air Force was going to remove the A-10s from Selfridge Air Force Base. In January of this year, we're very thankful that you publicly announced the decision to base 12 KC-46s at Selfridge Air Force Base. We appreciate that decision. But as you know, Michiganders who have worked on or near Selfridge are very focused on getting a fighter mission there. So I just want to hear very clearly, as I think you've stated publicly before, that just because we got those refuelers doesn't mean we're precluded from any future basing of fighter aircraft, which you know Michiganders will be fighting hard for.
Your delegation is very consistent. I just testified with Senator Peters. You actually had the same question. You are not precluded from another fighter mission. But the reason we put the KC-46 there was to offset the fact that we are taking out the A-10. So I don't want there to be confusion about that.
Right, and I don't think any Michigander is happy that we're replacing a fighter mission with a refueler mission. So we're looking for refuelers and a fighter mission, not refuelers instead of a fighter mission. But we'll fight that battle another day.
Fully understand.
In relation to that issue, I co-led an amendment last year in the NDAA that requires the Air Force to submit a fighter recapitalization plan. That report was unfortunately due on March 30th. Today is beyond March 30th. Can you help us understand when we'll get that plan?
General Allvin and I have reviewed the final draft. It's very close to coming over. It should be over here as soon as we finish coordination on it.
Okay. That report is very important to a number of us, both in the House and the Senate, to understand your planning. And I think per your comments, if we want to maintain a strong deterrent against China, we need to make sure we have fighters in the air that can do that and fighters at the ready to do that. There will be a number of us who are working on a bill in this year's NDAA which will say before you can retire fighter aircraft, you must show your math on your plan. So we are taking this to the next step. But your plan and helping us understand the strategy would give us more confidence for some of us who are watching these things change. Separately, on the issue of PFAS, the chemical that has contaminated a number of drinking water systems and groundwater systems around our current and former bases in Michigan. Since I've been here, I've been hammering on this issue because we've got communities that literally can't drink the water, and they have their location right next to a base. The Department of Defense, which I worked at for 7 years, has fought us every step of the way, and now the EPA has officially changed the standards on PFAS in drinking water. Some of the areas around our military bases, particularly Oscoda military base, cannot drink their water. Please tell us what you plan to do to now live up to the federal standards that you all claimed were the reason why you couldn't clean up these sites.
Well, we were all waiting for the standards. The standard has been announced. I think it's 4 parts per trillion, which is very stringent compared to what we'd been using. The next step is to evaluate the impact of that will be. We're going to prioritize communities where drinking water is most affected. So we will be working with communities as we go forward with that. I think we have something like on the order of $100 million in the budget in '25 to address this, but that's the tip of the iceberg. It's going to take a lot more than that to remediate the sites that are affected. So we've already done assessments. We're going to see what this standard means now in terms of remediation requirements, and then we're going to move forward with those.
I appreciate that. Some of these communities have been waiting upwards of 10 or 15 years, so while it may be a new standard to us as of last week, it is not a new issue for people who literally have to buy their own water. And I would ask for a bit of an attitude change for the folks who are on the ground, who have been fighting us tooth and nail and who now need to accept reality and help us clean.
The lady's time's expired. Chair, now I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I've enjoyed working with all three of you. I do got to point out, though, that I did go to Air Command and Staff College and National War College with General Allvin. He was always top of the class. He was a top athlete, and he never looked like he worked hard. So we just can't figure out how he does it. But with that, though, I do got a couple comments and concerns. The Department of Air Force is requesting $262 billion. But what I'd like the committee to understand, $45 billion of that is pass-through spending, not going to the Air Force, going to totally unrelated agencies. That's about 17% of the Air Force budget. Now, I think this clouds the vision of some of us and others that look at budgets of just how much the Air Force is getting. I think it exaggerates that appearance of how much money the Air Force has. And I sure wish we could correct that process. Secondly, I want to note that as per gross domestic product, we're spending the second lowest on defense in our history, going back to World War II. So our spending levels are significantly lower than the norms going back to World War II. And we see it in this year's budget. We're looking at a 1% increase, and you figure in inflation, it's about a 2% cut to what we need to be doing. And this is at a time we got China, Russia acting the way it is, breaking all the norms in Ukraine. We have Iran just fired 330 projectiles into Israel. So I'm concerned. I don't think we're going the right way. So my first question is to Secretary Kendall. At what point is our Air Force and Space Force too small to deter China?
To be direct about this, Congressman Bacon, my concern is more about quality than quantity. We are taking out some marginal force structure of our oldest aircraft. We're divesting some more this year. But getting to the quality we need to be competitive is really my first priority. We talked earlier about contested environments and having adequate technological capability to succeed in a contested environment is really first for us. We don't want our aircraft to be cannon fodder. We want them to be successful. We want our airmen to be successful. So we're trying to move in that direction as quickly as we can. I think that General Allvin should talk about the size of the Air Force. I think that you deserve to hear his opinion on that, but that's where I am.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Congressman. I think Secretary's exactly right. It's easy for us to fall into the numbers for numbers, and it's an easy way to do it, to count. But as you know, you've been in combat. You understand that the platform is only as good as the crew, and it's also only as good as the munition that it has on board, which has to be sophisticated enough to reach the target. But also it has to have a sensor that can tell you where the target is. And those sensors need to be in a place where they can be resilient. We also have to have the path to get there. We also have to have the place where that aircraft can recover in a contested environment. All those things go together, and I think it might be increasingly unuseful and unhelpful to start understanding the capability of the Air Force by just counting tails. There is that the phrase that says, quantity has a quality all its own. It's only if it's effective and capable. Otherwise, that's just a larger quantity of the aircraft that you're losing.
If I may interject, though, last year we said we were 7 fighter squadrons short of what we thought we need. But if you look at the budget, we're going to cut about 10 more squadrons. So I would say there is some numbers that we need. I mean, we don't need F-35s all over Iran or the Middle East to shoot down, stuff over Jordan, for example. I need to ask one more question. I'm going to cut out a few because I want to yield some time here to Sam Grace if I can. But the Air Combat Command says they need 22 EA-37s for the Far East fight, and we only have 10. Are we going to have a plan to get to 22? This is General Allvin.
I think when we look at, again, it's what is the risk of having less than 22 versus having not enough of the ability to have the munitions. So you can have all the jamming that you want, but if you can't get the munitions through. So it sounds like a quibbling answer, but quite frankly, I try and look at the entire system. So the capability of 10, and also we look at the platforms that we're using for those EA-37s, they're starting to be diminished in their reproducibility, and so you find yourself looking too far into the future to diminishing supply and those sort of things. But I think looking at it systematically, trying to say, if that 11th or 12th or 13th EA-37, is that more important than some other of this system that enables us to complete the kill chain?
I just put on ACC and PACOM, so they need 22 for the kinds of cyber stuff they can do, but I'll let it go with that. I know I didn't leave you much time, Mr. Graves, but I yield 20 seconds to you.
I don't think that's enough time.
Okay.
So I'll
yield
back.
Here now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the Supreme Allied Commander, General Cavoli, was here in front of this committee. And he gave, I think, testimony that was, I think, historic in nature. He was commenting on what was going on in Ukraine, and he said, at this moment, not weeks from now, but at this moment, he could not overstate the gravity of what's facing our effort in Ukraine right now, and the effort of the Ukraine military. So, he also said that in his 3 decades of study in academies and tactical studies and his work as general, he found one thing that was extremely important. He said, if one side has the ammunition and the other side doesn't, the side with the ammunition wins. I think in modern day warfare, I think it's a fair statement. I want to ask you. I think you could say, as the ground is now drying up in Ukraine and the muddy season is over and the offensive and the illegal war of Putin grinds forward on the ground, I think it's a fair statement to say the side that has air superiority always wins too, and the other doesn't. Can you comment on tactically how critical this moment is? Not anything that, this doesn't have to be classified to go down this road. How critical is this moment where you're having that kind of ground war, where they're ceding territory now, that tens of thousands of Ukrainians gave their lives for, and the strategy on the ground? How important it is where the United States, which is uniquely situated, by the way, the munitions and the air assets that are necessary are uniquely ours. Our allies don't have what's necessary at this moment. So can you tell us how critical this moment is, not weeks, in terms of moving on the $95 billion Senate security package, which passed the Senate, by the way, with a 70-29 bipartisan support. How critical is that to move on right now in terms of the fact the air superiority imbalance is so great? And how does that affect things on the ground?
Congressman, I'm not going to try to provide a stronger professional opinion than General Cavoli. He's intimately familiar with the situation. I'm watching the intelligence. I think we all are. My colleagues are on the Joint Staff. But to your early comment, a summary of what you said about weapons and air superiority, it's about resources. decide what the resources is going to win here. And Ukraine just doesn't have the resources, and Russia has been applying them. There's a big imbalance there. And the price for us of this, when you think about the fact that we have almost a $900 billion defense budget to provide for deterrence, and that if we fail to deter Russia effectively here for a few $1 billion, what that means in terms of the consequence, all that other investment is essentially wasted if we don't succeed in defeating aggression here. That's what's on the table, and it is an urgent need from everything I have seen. I'll stop with that and let the chiefs make comment.
Generals?
Again, I would also yield to General Cavoli, and also I've been in touch with the USAFE commander, General Hecker, as well, who's understanding sort of the air picture, better than I can from D.C. and in Washington. But it certainly is the case. It's a different type of air battle now, obviously, when you're talking about it's very heavily electromagnetic spectrum heavy area, and drones are involved. But it's still, if you can have the advantage from the air, it is critical. And the Secretary's point is the right one, though. It's overall resources to be able to formulate a battle plan that is executable, especially in the springtime here when the fighting's going to pick up when it dries up. It's going to be key.
Overall, I think, is a critical word that you use, because without this air superiority, frankly, winning isn't going to be possible. General, do you want to comment on that?
If we hear from General Cavoli routinely, I agree with his assessment. I agree with what you heard him say as well. We recognize that we're in a unique time frame. A land war of this size in Europe just has not happened for generations, and if we don't respond properly, it could only get worse. And I think we just have to recognize what it is we're standing for, what we choose to defend, and stand up and support it.
And while I appreciate what Speaker Johnson's trying to do moving forward, even if he's successful, that's going to be weeks and weeks and weeks before we get something on the president's desk, if we do it all. We have to act now, and it's urgent. And thank you for reinforcing that. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Allvin, after falling short in 2023 for the first time since 1999 in your recruitment goals, the Air Force is on pace to reach those goals for 2024. What changed?
Well, thank you for that, Congressman. We really attacked this aggressively when we saw the downslide happening. And we looked at several things. We looked at our policies to ensure that they were still relevant. We looked at some things that maybe we were being overly restrictive of, so we did a clean sweep of that. A couple things that were sort of as easy as falling off a log. Why, if you can decrease the time it takes to have someone who wants to be naturalized become a citizen, that attracts people in. If you can understand the height and weight measurement that was required to even be considered, and you can relax that to where it's consistent with the rest of the DoD standards, those are some simple things we did. But some other things that we're doing to follow up on that is we're ensuring that we can have the recruiters do more of the pounding the shoe leather time and not doing as much admin time. So there were several things we did, a little bit more targeted marketing, reaching out to other things. So it was really attacking on all fronts. And I think that, plus the fact that we're coming out of COVID and people are starting to wake up again and we're engaging. We put notes out to our wing commanders to get out to the community so people can actually see what their military can do for them. I think it was the compilation of all of those things that put us on the right path, and now we're making sure that we just don't rest on those laurels, and we're looking into the future to make sure we can sustain that.
Would you say the Air Force has loosened its standards?
I would not say loosened its standards at all. As a matter of fact, I'll give you the example. I talked about the body fat composition, and people think the body fat composition is a different standard. We had a body fat composition restriction before we'd even consider someone coming into basic training. Even though we'd advanced our basic training, better nutrition, better fitness, when we put those standards back to DoD standards, we enabled another 4,500 recruits to be able to come in. We have done longitudinal studies on those, and of those, only one did not make it all the way through. So we're making sure the standards and the quality sustain while we're actually opening the aperture to more Americans who can serve.
Different story for the Air National Guard. Still below our recruitment goals. What are we doing to fix it?
Well, the Air National Guard is also making gains. They had a little bit longer way to go. So part of the issue with the Air National Guard is we've had pretty high retention rates in the United States Air Force in the active duty, and some of that affiliation is how they get their numbers up as well. But they have increased 31% from over last year. So where last year they were well short, this year I think they're targeting to be within 5% of the goal. Their Air Force Reserves is going to be either within 1% or they're going to make the goal as well. So across the board, we're actually making progress.
Can you quantify how far off we are with Air National Guard?
The Air National Guard right now is on a path to be within 5%. Yeah, I get that. I got to get the exact what that raw number turns out to be, but they're within 5% of their goal.
Secretary Kendall, do you have any advice on what we can do to fix that, the Air National Guard recruitment numbers?
No, we've been working this very hard ever since we started realizing we were going to be below our target year before last. I'm going to give General Allvin a lot of credit. He ran a task force as the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force that addressed an awful lot of these issues. We also just put more resources at it. We have increased in our 25 request, we're increasing the amount of money for the Guard for recruiting. A lot of what we're seeing is just lack of familiarity with the military. People don't have the same exposure they once did. So we're trying to reach out and get into communities much more, make people understand what we offer. I think there's some misperceptions about that we're trying to fight against. I've never been terribly concerned about this because I've always felt that we had management tools at our disposal to address the problem, and if we just put more resources on it and were thoughtful, we were going to work our way out of it. And that's exactly what's been happening. So I'm reasonably comfortable with, I'm very happy with the progress we've made, actually, particularly with the active and the reserve, and the Guard's not very far behind. I think we're going to be okay on this.
Secretary, has the Air Force ever intentionally prevented itself from recruiting from children of military families or service members, veterans? Has that ever been an intentional
Not that I know
part
of.
of
I mean,
Air Force recruitment?
a lot of our people come in because they've experienced the military through their family life. So I think we have a fairly significant proportion of people that come from that background. We encourage that.
Yeah, you would agree, General?
Absolutely.
The biggest source of military recruitment are the children of military
Absolutely.
families.
That's right, Congressman.
So thank you. I yield back.
Before I go to the next member, I want to pause and recognize the presence of one of our former colleagues, former chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, and my friend Jim Cooper of Tennessee. Welcome back, my friend. Good to have you. Mr. Kim, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you all for coming on out. As I was reading through your testimony, your joint testimony, you all emphasized and pointed out just the development of hypersonic missile capabilities by both China as well as Russia. I guess I just want to ask you, are we prioritizing enough hypersonic defense capabilities and the development of those? I mean, when we're seeing that rise, I know we are investing in our own capabilities when it comes to hypersonic, but what about the defense side of things? I'm trying to get a better understanding of where we're scaled to given this very concerning rising threat.
Defense against hypersonics is important to us because there are a lot of hypersonic weapons potentially targeting our air bases in particular. The responsibility for that largely falls on the Missile Defense Agency and on the Army. What we are doing to contribute to that, in particular, is our space-based missile warning system that we're deploying, which will support an overall architecture of hypersonic defense, particularly against some of the intermediate and longer range threats. And General Saltzman could address what we're doing there. That's moving forward pretty quickly. I understand that the Army recently our MDA has recently awarded a contract, or is about to, for an interceptor that will be more capable against some of these targets. So that's a work that I don't think is moving quite as fast as we'd like to see in an ideal world.
Yes, sir. About $3 billion in FY25 devoted to what we're calling the proliferated warfighter space architecture. And it's not just that we're putting more sensors up. Those sensors are more capable and actually give us some tracking capabilities. And so the precursor to missile defense is missile warning, and so that's what we're putting in place.
Yeah.
And I would also add that over the past several months, there's been an ongoing study, analysis of alternatives that should come out in June on air and cruise missile defense of the homeland. That's been the Department of Air Force led that study. And it's really broken it down into 3 areas that you really need for air and cruise missile defense. You need the sensors, and then you need the effectors, degrade them, kill them, whatever, and then you need the command and control structure. So we have been able to look at each of those elements. That's going through an analysis of alternatives to determine the exact architecture. to be able to put those together. And as General Saltzman said, the missile warning, missile tracking is a key part of that sensor, but that analysis of alternatives should be done in the next couple months on the architecture, and then we'll look at building out the pieces to that to have a better defense against cruise missiles, hypersonics, and others.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I'd love to be able to keep in touch with you all about this, and I know that there's limitations what we can talk about in this kind of setting, but, you know, in other opportunities, I'd like to have a better sense, especially when it comes to the maneuverability that really sets us apart from other types of challenges. So I understand the warning and the tracking, but, you know, how do we think through the tracking as well as the interceptors when we're talking about something that with that kind of velocity, but also that kind of maneuverability, and I'd like to have that sense. I want to just switch gears to another type of threat. Obviously, we've talked a lot about cybersecurity in the past and the challenges on that front. The joint base in my district, McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, is home to the 140th Cyber Operations Squadron. You know, those cyber operators are performing these kind of critical work for the defense of our country every single week. And I guess I'm just trying to get a sense from you, how do we better support our cyber operators in the Air National Guard and the force overall so that we can try to make sure that this is rising to the level that we need to? I'm trying to have a better sense of, you know, how are these pieces fitting together in your minds?
Our cyber capabilities are really critical to our operational success overall. And frankly, whether we'll even be able to get into the fight because of the potential for cyber attacks. One of the things we've done under the Reoptimizing for Great Power Competition set of initiatives is we're elevating the 16th Air Force, which was under Air Combat Command, to be a direct reporting command. It'll be the AF Cyber, if you will, the Air Force component of the Cyber Command, but it will also have responsibilities for the Air Force as a whole. So we're trying to strengthen our capability there. We're also creating warrant officers in that field, and we are creating new units. We're putting new units together that are dedicated to that function. My expectation is that we will expand that in the future. We're moving in that direction now, but I think it's going to grow even more. I just saw a Defense Science Board report on the cyber threats that we face to our infrastructure, and I think we have to do things to address that as well. So it's a very high priority, and I think the Guard's ideally positioned to play an important role in that. You know, we'll be able to tap into people who are doing, you know, similar functions basically in the civil world, and then have them available to bring into the military in a crisis. I think that's going to be very valuable to us. It's a great way to get that expertise.
Okay, great. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
The F-35 is our signature Air Force platform. What percentage of them are fully mission capable today? Mr. Secretary.
Congressman, if you give me a second, I'm going to pull up my card and give you an exact answer.
Okay. Happy to.
Your eyes are probably better than mine. 55% is the number we have for operational availability.
Full operationally capable.
55% for operational availability.
Do you think that's a good number or a bad number?
I think that's not a good number.
Failing.
I wouldn't put it quite in that category.
A D?
I'd ask General Allvin to comment on that. It's a number we'd like to see something.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because we got testimony that is a little contrary to that. Lieutenant General Schmidt, head of the F-35 program, gave testimony to the TAL subcommittee at HASC, and that testimony was that as of February of 2023, so a little over a year ago, only 29% were fully mission capable.
I think we need to talk the difference between operational availability and mission capable.
Okay, so how many are fully mission capable today?
I do not have that number, but I would not dispute what the JPO has in front. And I would look
29%, so fully mission capable, 29%. You have no basis to dispute that, but you don't really know if it's true or false.
I have no basis to dispute it, but I would like to.
So you would agree that 55% is like a D, that 29% is definitely failing, right?
For fully mission capable, but the missions that they can accomplish.
I go meet with the folks at the 33rd at Eglin Air Force Base in the district I represent, and they're doing a lot of, there's a lot of mission there, but like even the guys who are also at Eglin doing test, they end up being at the very end, right? And I totally get why you want your operational squadrons to be the most capable, but then test gets put to the end, and then we're not meeting our needs. Like, I just think anyone watching this, one, would be surprised that you, General, don't know the exact percentage that are operationally capable. And two, I think people would be surprised that it's 29%. And this GAO report that I found on breakingdefense.com that I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record, it says that the reason we are not capable is because you guys at the Pentagon have given too much power to Lockheed Martin and its subcontractors for sustainment. Do you believe Lockheed Martin has been given too much power on the sustainment of the F-35?
I believe that Lockheed Martin has more power than in some other weapon systems. They do have the contracted logistics system that was part of the procurement plan that was put in place 20 or some years ago.
Well, right, I mean, but it's not working. If the Lockheed Martin built the F-35, only 29% of them are fully operationally capable right now. We've all agreed that's failing. So now the question is, why is it failing? And this GAO report says the reason it's failing is because the fox is watching the hen house. Because the very contractor bilking the taxpayer for this platform is now in a position where they can't sustain it. Do you have a basis to disagree with that conclusion?
I have a long history with the F-35, and I inherited the program. I came into it in 2010. It was a few years into production at that point. And the first time I saw the program laid out, the schedule for it and so on, and when the decisions and points were going to be, the question I asked, and I'm going to quote myself, who's running this program, the government or Lockheed Martin? That's a quote from 2010.
I think you have your answer, Mr. Secretary.
And we set up the program, and it was originally set up under a philosophy of management called total system performance, which essentially gave to the prime contractor complete control of the program. We did not acquire the intellectual property to allow the government to come in and step in and control the program.
It sounds like
we are still fighting that problem today.
Well, right, but that is such important testimony for us to hear. Every member of the committee heard that. The government isn't running this program. Lockheed Martin's running this program.
That was a question I asked.
Well, it sounds like you got the answer. What's the answer to the question, Mr. Secretary? Because only 29% of them are operationally capable.
We took a lot of steps to try to get that under control. I once imposed a production contract on Lockheed. I dictated a price to them because we couldn't get a negotiation done. I did a unilateral contract. Let them take me to court if they wanted to. They chose not to. Put in place program managers who were very firm with the contractor and insisted on performance. We've had some conversations with the current head of the JPO, and we've had conversations with the CEO of Lockheed.
I appreciate those conversations. I've always found you to be the truth teller. You're always very honest with the committee and straightforward. The problem is the tail here is wagging the dog, and it's not going to get better unless there's accountability for the fact that their planes don't fly. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, I would like to thank our airmen who have served us well in the 335th Fighter Squadron, kicked butt, defending our ally Israel over the past weekend, and I'm extremely proud of that. Thank you to our witnesses who are here today. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. In this fiscal year's budget, there's a plan for the Air Force to eliminate one fighter squadron from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. We've been talking about this well over a year now, with many mixed messages along the way. There was a report requirement regarding the force structure rationale due to the Congress, due to the committee on April 1st, which we did not receive. We then moved forward to inquire about the report again, and I was anticipating, hoping to get the report by this meeting today, which we did not receive. What's causing the delay?
The report's in final review and coordination. General Allvin and I have both looked at a final draft. We should have it to you very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, if it's in final draft, we're hitting print on the page here, the computer, whatever we're doing, can you share with us, since it's on the way, what criteria has been used to determine taking away a squadron at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base?
It's a longer conversation about the mix of the fighter force, the cost effectiveness of every element, the set of capabilities we have to have, and the cost of any modernization that would be required to keep the aircraft current. And then, of course, total resources available to the department. So we have for some time known we had taken.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I look forward to seeing this report soon, really soon. And yes or no, do you believe when there's a required report and you're submitting a budget, that the report maybe could help inform us.
I do agree with that. You'll have the report very shortly.
A loss of 520 jobs at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base would have a tremendous impact on our community in eastern North Carolina. Most of the counties in our state are ranked Tier 1 counties, which are the most economically distressed. Congress has told the Air Force to modernize. I get it. If we can still uphold our national security interests in investment decisions, then should we consider, I'm just asking, should we consider the impact of the decisions on the local communities?
We do consider that impact when we make these decisions.
How was that considered in this process?
Well, we try overall to minimize those impacts. Unfortunately, sometimes they're unavoidable.
Can you tell me the median income in Wayne County of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base?
I cannot, Congressman.
You don't know. Do you realize this is one of the most impoverished counties in a state in eastern North Carolina? In a region, our congressional district, we're 421 median income. I look forward to seeing that report. Are there alternatives when we look at what you're rolling out here to bring other missions to Seymour Johnson, to replace the jobs that'll be lost, to take care of the impact of this community?
At this time, I'm not aware of an alternative. We have looked for that. We try to do that.
Mr. Secretary, do you care about this community?
Of course I do, Congressman.
Can you tell me then the plan that is in place to consider the impact for any alternatives that you can bring to this community?
When we do these decisions, we look at a range of alternatives, and we try to do everything we can to protect the interests of the community.
But I'm asking clearly to you right now, what's the plan for just considering to roll out, looking at alternatives for this community?
Whenever there's an adjustment like this, we try to work with the community to make it as painless as possible. Yeah.
What efforts have taken place in this community right now? This is the first I've heard there was any effort to reach out to the community. Yeah. Can you tell me specifically?
I'd have to get you that for the record.
Mr. Secretary, I can tell you this. I love the Air Force. I served in the Air Force. I take great pride in my service in the Air Force. And I believe you know that. But I also believe that if we can maintain our national security interests, we really have to look hard at the decisions that are being made. And I'm not satisfied today with your answers. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I was struck by a statement you just made, and I just want to touch on Representative Gates's concern about readiness. I'm the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee. I mean, I understand there is a quality over quantity argument. But the basic issue is if they can't fly, that is a strategic failing on our part. And I think the Pentagon has become so focused on, I know it's a balance, I know there's a pendulum swing, but on making these kind of handmade, bespoke, high-tech Ferraris, but sometimes you need a fleet of pickup trucks. And you certainly need, whether they're Ferraris or pickup trucks, that can operate in the desert and can operate out in the corrosive environment in the Pacific. So let's talk about some of your pickup trucks. The Air Force owns and operates DOD's largest fleet of commercial derivative aircraft. They use commercial parts. This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, they need a high school diploma. It's not anything high tech about this. All of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000. This is a $90,000 bag of bushings that you need for any jet turbine engine. just to operate. So the exorbitant cost due to DoD only buying commercial parts from the OEMs, which is essentially sole source, is literally driving us out of business. I mean, the interest on our debt alone is now exceeding, for the first time in American history, the entire defense budget. We can't afford it anymore. So with FAA compliant parts, you cut the cost in half or even more. So my question is, why can't, these are commercial birds out there. By the way, it has all kinds of implications for contested logistics when you can access commercial parts in the middle of a war, potentially in the Pacific. Why can't we use FAA compliant? It's the safety standard leader in the world. Why can't we do that?
I don't know a reason why we couldn't. I'm familiar with some of the issues you're trying to raise here from my previous position.
Yeah, I know you are. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, Defense Logistics Agency used to report to me. That's where we do a lot of our parts acquisition. And we had an issue when I was there with people gouging us, basically, charging us too much for parts. And we ended up, I think, in court over it.
What can we, just in the interest of time, Secretary, come back to us? How can this committee help you fix that? We literally can't afford the modernization, the recruiting, the basing, everything we need if we're paying $90,000 for a bag of bushings.
I work with Dr. LaPlante on this because it's a systemic issue, and again, most of the parts buying is done through DLA.
But you have the largest fleet of commercial birds that.
Well,
right? You've got the Ferraris, but these are the pickup trucks, and we should just be able to buy.
What we have to be able to do is challenge the prices. And we have to have knowledgeable buyers who can understand when they're getting a ridiculous price and go in and ensure that they get.
Let's work together on that. I just need, in the interest of time, I just want to move again to the recruiting and the Genesis program. I have here a quote that was given during the Air and Space Forces Association Air Warfare Symposium that basically says, if you do the math, you're somewhere in the ballpark of 5,600 folks that we could have likely brought on if they weren't waiting on a medical approval, right? And now you have a program that digs into medical records, and so a kid who took ADHD meds because maybe his parents got divorced when he was 14 or 15 now can't get approved. Somebody who wants to serve, I think we're trying to solve one problem, and then we've created a whole disproportionate others. And I want to work with you on that. Let's fix the Genesis system and how it is affecting you. And then just in my question remaining, you are the only service that in your proposal proposed a cut in junior ROTC in high schools. Do you think that junior ROTC in high school is getting to this Gen Z, getting to them early about service, leadership, discipline, followership is helpful?
Junior ROTC is a valuable program. I'm not aware that we made a cut. We may have for some reason. I'd have to go back and get back to you.
I look forward to working with you on that as well. You get a better citizen and you get a recruit.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last summer I had the privilege of traveling to Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, Guam, and the Philippines with the chairman and ranking member and many of my colleagues on this committee. And of course, we made our traditional stop in Hawaii. During that stop, however, I was surprised by a briefing on the unacceptable state of the Hickam ramp and the continued challenges the Hickam side of Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam experiences as part of their joint basing relationship with the Navy. From what I understand, the Hickam ramp is in an unacceptable state that reflects years of budgetary neglect, and the cost of getting it back to operational readiness is jaw-droppingly high. I know that the Air Force and the Navy have had many conversations about the right path forward since last summer. We got an update from your team about the latest developments, and it seems like there is a lot still to be determined, and we're just shy of 1 year since this issue was first raised to this committee's attention when we were on site. I am concerned, however, given the focus on quickly reoptimizing for great power competition, that the necessary maintenance and improvement to the Hickam ramp does not appear to be in the fiscal year 2025 budget request or in the unfunded priorities list. Mr. Secretary, am I looking at this right? If this is a priority, where is it? And if so, would you please explain to me how the Air Force is working to address these issues with the Hickam ramp, and who's going to pay to fix this problem?
Thanks for your question. General Allvin and I were just there and got a chance to look at the condition of the ramp personally. The team there has laid out a good plan to move forward, and we have had a lot of discussions with the Navy. The Navy has funded upgrade to the ramp. My understanding is that there's $379 million in the period starting in 25 through 30 to fix the ramp and connecting taxiways. So that's budgeted and programmed, as I understand it now, and I'll just verify that to make sure it's correct.
Yeah, that's what we understand with the Navy doing that. But we also, to the Secretary's point, we talked to the Airfield Authority. You know, Colonel Obianca there gave us a fairly in-depth brief about what needs to be done. And now, so we're following up on that trip to be able to ensure that we continue to work with the Honorable Chaudhry, our Installations and Environment Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, has been really driving this hard with his Navy counterpart. But now, understanding if there are other memorandums of agreement to where we can have different authorities to make sure we can help control the pace of how that ramp gets fixed, we're going to do that.
So when can we anticipate operational readiness based on your conversations with the Navy, just given, you know, our proximity to the Indo-Pacific, our strategic role that we play? It's very concerning. I think it was concerning for the leadership of this committee to see the condition of the ramp. So when do we expect operational readiness to be in place?
Well, again, this is military construction, so the military construction has to have the planning and design, get to 35% planning and design. It needs to get to 35% planning and design before I could even consider putting it on my unfunded priorities list. So it is going through that process now with the Navy, and we're going to look at how fast to move it based on the maybe the sequencing and the phasing of the design and the MILCON. But that's us working with the Department of the Navy.
Well, my humble suggestion is to pick up the pace in terms of the urgency, because if we truly want to be ready in the Indo-Pacific, you cannot have conditions like this existing. So thank you for that, and we will continue to be in conversation with you and the Navy about this. You know, I think the issues with Hickam are illustrative of a broader, quite frankly, set of infrastructure sustainment challenges in the Indo-Pacific, and the reality of distributed operations requires relying often on infrastructure in less than ideal conditions, all in a non-permissive, contested environment. And so, Mr. Secretary, how is the Air Force managing and adapting to the risks inherent in infrastructure sustainment challenges in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, General Allvin, I got to see a lot of that firsthand. We visited Tinian, which is one of our hubs, our spokes rather, our more remote bases that we're in the process of clearing and repaving so that we can use that strip. Under the operational imperative initiatives from 2 years ago, which the committee supported and were funded starting largely in '24, we do have a lot of money allocated to this purpose, upgrading our facilities in the region so that they can support the operational concept we have, agile combat employment. So we're moving forward. We're not moving as fast as I would like to, I think, as you would either. We are moving forward on that a set of initiatives designed to address those problems. We're well aware of them.
Thank you, and I know I'm just about to run out of time, so I will put this in as a question, but I would like for you to expound a bit. In your posture statement, you talked about challenges imposed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, especially in the procurement and research and development, and I would like for you to just talk a bit more and elaborate on how those budgetary constraints also impact investments in infrastructure sustainment. So
Gentley's
submit
time
that for the
expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for our witnesses for being here today. I appreciate your time. Gentlemen, the Air Force faces the difficult task of extending aircraft like the B-52 and the T-38 that first flew in the 1950s while simultaneously developing new state-of-the-art aircraft like the B-21 and the T-7. These new platforms take time to develop, but our Air Force needs to get these new aircraft into the hands of our airmen sooner than later. General Allvin, last year I asked General Brown about the T-7 Red Hawk program and how we can get past the delays which have plagued this trainer. He said he was focused on the Air Force training pipeline because he needs airmen to be ready to train and fight, and that he had gathered the applicable groups in the same room to align their focuses and work on the issues of the T-7. Yet here we are again this year talking about T-7 delays due to parts quality and supply chain issues, sliding the delivery further to the right and backing up more and more airmen in the pipeline and creating an even greater pilot shortage. As you know, the T-7 will replace the aging T-38 fleet at Shepherd Air Force Base as part of the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program, which is, of course, based in my district. This problem isn't only going to affect the U.S. Airmen, is my point here. Our NATO allies that participate in pilot training in Wichita Falls are very concerned about the impacts on their militaries as well. We have a responsibility to get this right, and it seems like this issue isn't getting the attention it needs from the Air Force, in my opinion. The original initial operational capability for the T-7 was supposed to be this year, 2024, but now the Air Force is looking at the second quarter of FY28. General Allvin, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked General Brown last year. What is the Air Force doing to overcome these delays and help our industry partners get the T-7 to bases like Shepherd Air Force Base more quickly, and how are we ensuring that we end this never-ending cycle of bad news on our new platforms like the T-7 trainer aircraft? Can you commit to me here that we will get these jets to Shepherd Air Force Base as quickly as we possibly can?
Congressman, I'll start with the end one. Yes, as soon as we possibly can. We continue to work with Boeing and the T-7 unit. It's now in flight test, so we continue to move on. And as a former test pilot, I would hesitate to say that guarantees things are going to go as smoothly. Sometimes you do find things in flight tests that you hadn't before. There's a bit of the way that it was developed too, with the digital engineering being a bit new, that might cause new issues. It may allow us to go through testing more rapidly. But what General Brown said, he held to. We did put the right people in place. We are having a laser focus on it, trying to get past issue one at a time with the T-7 to ensure that we can bring that on as soon as possible. Now, in the meantime, we also understand, as you said, Congressman, we need to ensure that the T-38 can remain viable through then. And so, as part of my unfunded priority list, I had what the teams do I had our team go through a couple of sprints to look at what are the things that move the needle the most with respect to supplies to keep those J85 engine, to keep that refurbishment happening so we can keep that, which is a long pole in the tent for the T-38. So we're trying to tackle it on both ends, to be able to work with Boeing to accelerate and to do whatever we can to keep that T-38 flying so we can keep that pipeline of airmen, American and allied and partner nations as well.
Well, I'm committed to working with you on that. I think that we're headed for conflict somewhere in the world pretty soon, and we need to be ready to go, and we're not. The Air Force was the first service to start with the nacelle improvement program on its fleet of CV-22s, and it serves as a prime example of how targeted investment can yield exceptional results. From the data that has been provided to my office, the nacelle improvement program has saved 10,000 maintenance man-hours to date and has improved the ratio of man-hours to flight hours by 200%. The Air Force's decision to invest in this program and ensure we have the most capable inventory of airframes on the flight line for our service members is a model I believe the other services should follow and move expeditiously to adopt. While improving the quality of aircraft for the service member, it's also saving crucial resources at a time when budgets are going to be heavily constrained. General Allvin, while I realize that our time here is limited, I would like to ask if we could find a time for you to come by my office at some point in the future and discuss with me in detail what your plans are for the fleet of B-22 aircraft in the Air Force and for the next generation of tilt-rotor aircraft. We're manufacturing the B-280s, as you know, in my district, Bell Helicopter, in the Army's program, which I've been a big proponent of, and I'd like to see the other services follow that as well. However, with the time we have here today, General Allvin, how do you envision the role of the CV-22 when we think about Indo-Pacific theater, and what operational capabilities does it provide to our Air Force that are difficult to replace?
Well, Congressman, I will tell you that in the aftermath of the accident and now getting those back to flying again, General Bauernfeind is doing a comprehensive review. And as part of that, we are looking into all those things, from getting them back to flying, which is most important, safely and back operating, to look into the future of the CV-22. So, Congressman, I definitely take you up on your offer to be able to talk about that and the future, how we anticipate going forward with the CV-22 at the conclusion of that comprehensive review, which should be in the next 2 months.
Gentleman's time's expired here, and I recognize a gentleman from Texas, Mr. VZ.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask General Saltzman, General Allvin, have y'all ever heard of the term pseudofolliculitis? Okay, you've heard of the term pseudofolliculitis. I wanted to ask you, because a lot of people don't know about this, but it's a skin condition that for people that have ingrown hairs, mainly in black men, and so when they shave, it can cause pain and discoloration. You can see discoloration under my neck right now. I love a good shave, but you can see this discoloration that's under my neck right now. And I wanted to just ask you, what are the current policies regarding shaving waivers in the Air Force and the Space Force, and what sort of accommodations are you looking at? And I want to be 100% clear. I mean, I have a high school senior. I tried to get him to join the Corps of Cadets at A&M. He wasn't interested. And so I believe in military service and understand the uniformity that you're trying to get everybody to be the same and you shave their hair. So I'm not trying to change that. I respect that and understand why that needs to be in place. But this is obviously a very, serious issue and has affected men's careers. I have a pastor in my district that I'm trying to help. We're doing casework for him right now, trying to help him because of his discharge status, because of this issue that he had with shaving. And so just wanted to get a better understanding of how these waivers work.
Well, Congressman, we do have, and more recently, we've sort of raised the awareness of the waiver process. And so that if you have that condition and you go to see the medical professionals there at the medical treatment facilities, they grant you the verification that that's a medical condition, and you're granted the waiver. And I believe the number of shaving waivers for this particular condition, I'd like to get you the exact numbers, but it's gone up by a degree of, I would say, almost 50% increase in the past several years because of the awareness of that. And so we have an increased number of shaving waivers, and we have an increased number of those who are now complying with the waived ability to have a beard.
Are you pretty confident that it's not affecting people's careers and discharge now? Have you all looked into that? Because even though someone may get a waiver, you also want to make sure that there may be someone else that's not resentful of them getting the waiver, because and we deal with this sort of stuff on this committee all the time. There's always a group of people that, well, it's been this way for 100 years and I don't understand why we got it, you know what I mean? And so when trying to work through that sort of thing can be a career impediment to someone being able to advance. And so is it something that everybody is embracing and understanding the importance of these waivers?
Yeah, Congressman, I would say it is. I would also say it's a work in progress, because along the same line, there is also an increase in requests for religious accommodation along the same lines. And so not my concern, but my interest as the chief is to ensure that we respect that and we honor that. So not only do we ensure that those who qualify for those actually achieve those the exceptions to policy and the waivers, but we also make sure that others aren't exploiting it.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure on both sides of that.
General Saltzman.
Yeah, I think General Allvin said it just right. The key is, one is having a good process to grant the waivers expeditiously and appropriately, and then second is remove any stigma and make sure that those people that are accommodated are still respected and there's no adverse impacts. That's start of that is sensitivity towards it, and then second is about training and education to make sure everybody understands the situation.
Yeah, and you feel pretty confident about the educational process making its way through the ranks so everyone has an understanding of it?
I like the way General Allvin said it. I think it's a work in progress because we got to reach the entire group of people, but I think we're making the right strides.
Okay, good. And as far as you know, there hasn't been any recent discharges that anyone has faced because of this issue? Okay. Very good. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Smith, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. Secretary Kendall, earlier this week I sent you a bipartisan letter that I co-led with Strategic Forces Ranking Member Seth Moulton, expressing our strong support for the National Security Space Launch Program, ensuring that the United States has and maintains assured access to space is more important now than it ever has been. I know this is a bit early to expect a response, since we only shared the letter 2 days ago, but since you're here, might as well go ahead. Can you speak to the importance of the National Security Space Launch Program and to the benefits that are provided by utilizing block buys and encouraging robust competition within the launch industry?
Congressman Strong, thanks for your letter. I have seen it, and I appreciate the support. The current program was put in place originally about 10, 12 years ago by myself and General Polakowski in the Air Force. And it was designed to provide assured access to space and to provide for competition and to bring new entrants in. We went from buying rockets to buying launch services. And the thing that has happened over those years includes the emergence of more launch providers that we can tap into. So General Saltzman outlined that earlier. The phase 3 that is currently in competition is designed to open up the aperture even more and to take advantage of that. And the savings have been huge. The competition that has happened has allowed us to bring in new entrants and force prices down. It's helped encourage a lot of innovation, and it's taken advantage of what's been going on in the commercial world. So I think that the program overall has been a huge success.
Thank you. North Alabama is proud to host several companies which contribute to the success of the NSSL, including Blue Origin, along with just refurbished the historic Apollo test stand 4670 at Redstone Arsenal. That was in partnership with the City of Huntsville, Madison County Commission, and it's great to have that test site back rolling for the testing of the BE-3 and the BE-4 engines. United Launch Alliance, which has the largest rocket factory in the world in Decatur, Alabama, with 2.4 million square feet under roof, celebrated a near-perfect launch of their new Vulcan rocket. General Saltzman, Secretary Kendall, the United States leads the world in space exploration, research, and launch technology and capability. Much of this is to the thanks of hard work of thousands of Alabamians that don't call Huntsville Rocket City for nothing. As this has been discussed to link today, China is determined to overtake U.S. dominance in space and advance in its own space program. I'm concerned that the Chinese exploitation of our technology, components, and suppliers threatens our nation's well-earned position of leadership and reliable access to and utilization of space. One, how is the U.S. Space Force working to protect America's prominence in space?
As hard as we can.
There you go.
That's the short answer. Sir, I can't tell you how important that is, and I appreciate the question. We see the execution of space capabilities as vital to not only the U.S. military, but our broader economic interests in the country as well, and to those of our foreign partners. But we are now in a contested domain, and we have to think about it differently. So what used to be relatively simple to assure in space is now complicated. So we are building more resilient architectures to account for the fact that space is contested. Secondly, our adversaries are using space against us and threatening the joint force, something I can't stand for. And so we're working hard to put counterspace capabilities in place to deny our adversaries those advantages.
Thank you. How are we protecting against U.S. intellectual properties from being stolen and used against us? Is there anything in place to stop or hold U.S. companies accountable for taking adversary investments or succumbing to adversary influence?
The short answer is yes. There's a CFIUS process that I think you're familiar with, which reviews any business deals that involve acquisition of U.S. companies, particularly by possible hostile ownership. We also use contractual obligations to protect intellectual property, and we require cybersecurity protection by companies that we deal with to a certain level to ensure that their property is not as easily stolen. We're under assault, basically, by China in particular, but also to a certain degree by Russia and others to acquire our intellectual property. It comes in the form of cyber assault, it comes in the cyber attack, and it comes in the form of acquisition of companies to acquire the technology. It comes in the form of illegal ways of buying through third.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Kendall and General Saltzman and Allvin for taking the time to be here today with us. I have the privilege of representing New Mexico's 2nd District, home to Holloman Air Force Base in the 49th Wing, where we train the next generation of F-16 fighter pilots and MQ-9 operating crews. Now, I'm not going to ask you directly about this, but I did just want to bring this issue up with you today, and for the record, that we recently lost over 50 MQ-9 contractors that are part of the pilot training program, and we have heard conflicting reports both from base leadership and from the MQ-9 contractors who are former Air Force pilots themselves about the operational readiness of the MQ-9 program as it stands today at Holloman Air Force Base because of the loss of some of this this potential contract that was not renewed, which we are still fighting for. So I want to bring that up to your attention. Holloman is also home to the high-speed test track. It's one of the Department of Defense's most valuable tools to test and evaluate hypersonic weapons. In March, George Rumford of the Test Resource Management Center testified before this committee and spoke about the questionable future of the 70-year-old asset that was originally designed to test airplane ejection seats. He told us, quote, "If we're really going to test hypersonics, we're going to need a new track capability in our nation." Base leadership at Holloman has also echoed a similar sentiment that the track is outdated and a new one is needed to meet the testing demands of the future. Secretary Kendall and General Allvin, the Air Force has considered proposals for the reconstruction, modernization, or complete replacement of Holloman's test track, but we're not seeing any traction. Could you provide us an update on what the Air Force's long-term plans are for the future of this test track?
Yeah, we're aware of the importance of the track. Obviously, it is a very important asset, and there are concerns about its aging and its capabilities. The Test Resource Management Center for the Secretary of Defense, part of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment's office, is in the early planning phases about what to do about Holloman. One thing that's under consideration is a second track, which would have some features that the existing one does not. So it's under active review and consideration right now, but it's still in the early phases of doing that, I think.
Thank you, Secretary, and I appreciate updates to our community in Alamogordo, Doña Ana County, and Otero County as to the future of the track itself, in particular, because it impacts jobs in the community, but also, obviously, with the emphasis and the budget request for hypersonic testing, we want to know if we're going to be part of the solution to test these weapons in the future. Secretary Kendall and General Allvin, given Holloman's ability to conduct control and competitive and repetitive hypersonic testing, what would it mean for the department to lose access to this track?
It's an important research capability for us.
General?
I concur. It's one of those that we certainly anticipate using into the future, needing hypersonic tracks and those high-speed tracks. We're not going to be going slower.
Thank you, General. With my remaining time, I want to focus on housing issues at Holloman Air Force Base. Now, we were proud to secure a 6% increase in housing allowance from 2023 levels for service members at Holloman, but rural communities like Alamogordo continue to face challenges to meet our housing demands. Now, I recently heard from base leadership that despite the improvements ongoing at Holloman, we're still facing a housing shortage of about 1,100 people. Does the Air Force have plans to increase collaboration with the city of Alamogordo, with local nonprofits, and with other entities to construct additional housing? And if not, what steps are you taking to address this issue to make sure that the readiness of our airmen and women and their families is met with the dignity that they deserve to have adequate housing?
We'll work with the community to address that concern. I don't know that that's happened yet. I was not aware of the problem at Holloman and or at Alamogordo specifically. There is a housing requirement to market analysis going to be conducted this summer. And I think we can use that as a basis by which to move forward with the community.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Secretary. I look forward to working with you on those issues and continuing to work with the base leadership at Holloman to make sure that I continue to be their advocates and bring these issues to your attention. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. And thank you greatly for your service. General Allvin, this might be for you or for the Secretary. I'll talk about the A-10s, which I don't know if that's a source of contention with you guys, but I'm a big fan of the A-10 platform. And if I'm reading it correctly, we went from discontinuing the plane in the 2030s, late 2030s to 2028, correct? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I don't think we ever had it late in the 2030s, but yeah, it currently is by the end of 28. 28, 29 is when they will be divested.
I just want to be on record saying I think that is the worst idea. As someone who laid in the dirt with that plane over top of my head protecting us, I'll leave it at that. But so are we cross-training the pilots that are flying the A-10 platform and moving them over to airframes? From what I understand, we are deficient of pilots in the Air Force, correct?
We do have a pilot shortage on the staff level, but to answer to your question, Congressman, we actually are training the pilots and the maintainers, and quite frankly, part of the maintenance and operators, the pilot challenge that we have is we had intended the modernization plan to be a divestment and a modernization scale and speed. That was
just not working out very well for us.
Well, it's not because we are divesting too slow to be able to have the maintainers ready to work on the 5th generation platforms and those A-10 pilots to be able to fly those 5th generation aircraft. So we currently have a plan for every single one of those that are moving out of those to be able to, if it's there at the base on the active duty side, then we can move them. They're very mobile. We can put them in the 5th generation platform.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's just the process is slowing itself down. Not necessarily we have the ability to put the pilots in place because they most likely currently exist.
We can put the pilots in place, and we are doing that. On the active duty side, it's a little bit simpler. On the guard side, because they are sort of fixed to their location, they will have to transition to the flying platform that replaces the A-10 there. But we have a plan for. We are not planning on having any of those pilots or operators go unused.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, you coming down to my state here in the very near future?
I'd be delighted to.
I thought you were going down to Texas A&M to see the hypersonics capabilities.
I'm headed to A&M tonight.
Tonight?
Mhm.
So you are coming?
I'll be there tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to meet with you after the fact to get your thoughts on what Texas A&M is doing in the hypersonic in that space. It's, I think none of us in here are strangers to where we need to be when it comes to hypersonics.
I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Yes, sir. Can I talk to you about the crypto modernization issues that we're having in the Air Force? And if I'm correct, we're about a decade behind. Can you give me some?
We're behind.
Can you create a warm and fuzzy for me that we are moving properly, and that this isn't going to be a problem? Because I'm going to transition into General Saltzman. Sir, I did not mean to crash your office yesterday. It was great to meet you unexpectedly, but it's good to see you again today. Secretary, go ahead.
I think if you get into details, you get classified pretty quickly on crypto modernization, but it was not prioritized, I'll put it that way, for quite a few years while we were engaged in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations. Just wasn't important at the time. So we got behind. Recognized that about 2 years ago. General Brown and I addressed it, and we've been funding crypto modernization, I think, at a robust rate since then.
We were most likely going to catch up, so we don't have to have this conversation in the next couple.
Well, we need
I
to
get
get
reelected. We're not going to have this
actually,
conversation in 3 years.
Well, I hope not. We need to actually get to the next round of crypto modernization because the threat's getting more troublesome over time.
Is there a good communication between the Air Force and the Space Force with the Secretary by, with, and through, so the Space Force won't have these issues that the Air Force has kind of collected over the past decade?
I think I'll let my colleagues answer that question. I think we have a lot of close cooperation.
We're in all the same meetings to make sure we understand exactly what the challenges are. We build our budgets together to make sure they're synchronized so that we can roll out the capabilities in a comprehensive way.
Okay, I would just hate for us to walk into a dead end or fall on a sword when we don't have to. If we could take lessons learned not only from the Air Force but the other services.
My mantra, Secretary, has been one team, one fight.
Yeah, one team, one dream. I like it. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Before I go to the next one, I want to be able to say I got the chance to tour Texas A&M, their Bush Combat Development Facility. They're not only doing some really cool hypersonic research out there, but some directed energy research that's fascinating. I'm a big fan of that, and also the railgun. So there's just a lot of stuff at Texas A&M's doing.
I've got a full day there. They're going to show me all that, I think.
You'll come away impressed. It's pretty impressive. Now we have Mr. Horsford of Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and to the ranking member for this hearing. Secretary Kendall, it's great to see you again, and General Allvin, congratulations on your recent promotion. I look forward to working with you in your new position. My district is home to Nellis Air Force and Creech Air Force bases, which combined host over 15,000 military members and thousands of families who call Nevada home. General Allvin, I've asked this question to Secretary Kendall and your predecessor, so I want to make sure I get your perspective on it as well. What role do you see Nellis Air Force Base and Creech Air Force Base playing as part of our national defense strategy?
Well, Congressman, thanks for that question because I think they're critical. Obviously, Nellis Air Force Base, between the Warfare Center, the Virtual Test and Training Center, and our Shadow Operations Center, where we're understanding how to integrate the Advanced Battle Management System and the Next Generation C2, put all those together, as well as the Nevada Test and Training Range, and you have a nucleus for really some of the development of the concepts and the capabilities and tactics, techniques, and procedures for Air Force going into the future. So that's critical. Obviously, we have the right ramp space, we have the right runways, we have the right training ranges, everything is set up there. And with Creech, we obviously have the ability to conduct the medium altitude, the MQ-9 and such, those unmanned aerial vehicle operations. Between the two of them, I think it's quite critical to our future for the long term of the Air Force.
Completely agree, and we look forward to your leadership in that regard. Previously, airmen at Creech Air Force Base received assignment incentive pay to help encourage retention and offset some of the additional cost associated with being stationed at Creech. Creech has submitted a new request for approval of assignment incentive pay, and it's my understanding that the Air Force is supportive of the request. Can you discuss any movement in efforts to award assignment incentive pay for airmen stationed at Creech, please?
I'll have to get back to that, Congressman, because there is a process. If it's gone through the base, it comes up to the major command, and then comes up through the headquarters. Traditionally, those requests are made in association with undermanned units, not enough manpower there, but we'll certainly look at the requests coming through the base to the major command.
Yeah, and it is because of the unique element of what they do. It's not so much that there are fewer people, it's that the unique elements of what they do and that they have to go home at the end of their deployment every single day. And they need the wages to keep up with the cost of housing and childcare and other demands. So if we could factor that into the criteria, I'd appreciate it. Access to safe, secure, and affordable housing is another concern of the constituents that we represent. As recruits consider military service, the availability and affordability of adequate housing is a concern. Nellis Air Force Base is among the installations with the highest levels of unmet housing need. This time last year, that unmet housing need meant that young airmen were being released into off-base community housing after 11 months. It concerns me that since then, the issue has only worsened, with airmen now being released after only 8 months. I don't have to tell any of you, but 8 months is very short of the Air Force's requirements of 36 months time in service. General and Secretary, can you speak to the importance of ensuring adequate housing availability for both recruitment and retention of our military members, and what is currently being done to address the needs of our young, unaccompanied airmen at installations such as Nellis?
It's a priority for us, and we're making a substantial investment in that area in our overall budget. For Nellis specifically, we just did a dorm renovation there for about $4.5 million, and we are working on the potential to address the dormitory deficit with additional construction. So 2 dormitories at Nellis are being considered for MilCon right now.
Now, those 2 replacements, so you have the renovation. I know, and thank you to the chairman and the ranking member for working with me on the prioritization of those new dormitories, but we have older dorms that are coming out. So it's just like in public housing, you're really not adding to the supply, you're replacing supply that has come off the market, if you will. So I really need leadership in the Air Force to understand this dynamic. The unique element at Nellis, being off base is not affordable, and in some cases it's not safe. It's not in the best interest of the airmen and their family and our national defense. So I would really encourage leadership to work with me in this regard, and thank you to the chairman for your leadership as well.
Gentleman's time's expired here, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and what you do for our country. General Saltzman, I'd like to ask you about an issue, a problem that has come up in our launch of national security assets, and especially because it's indicative of a larger problem that we have. There is the certification that United Launch Alliance is doing for the Vulcan. They need a second successful flight to complete that certification process. And they have a payload built by Sierra Space, the Dream Chaser. So everything was on a good track, except the June date looks like it's going to have to slip 3 months to September because of an environmental assessment that has to be done according to the FAA for not the reentry site at Patrick, where it will land, Kennedy Space Center, but at Vandenberg, which is a backup place. Now, Vandenberg has been firing missiles for over 60 years. And it was a backup, I believe, for the space shuttle, or maybe it was the actual, I don't know which, but it's been a backup or a landing site as well as a launch site for all kinds of missiles over the years. And yet the FAA is calling for a new environmental impact statement. And you all were complaining, rightfully so, about how China is threatening to overtake us. Well, this is a self-imposed wound. You know, we have these, in what I believe are excessive regulations, in this case environmental regulations, that are slowing down a national security launch capability that's going to hurt our ability to get assets into space or slow them down. And first of all, I don't like these regulations being there in the first place, but if they're there, you've got to find a way to cut through the red tape and get the job done. So why is this even a problem, and why are we facing these kinds of delays when we look at China and they're just moving so fast and overtaking us?
Well, I appreciate the question and the concern. I share the concern with some of the interagency processes that we go through. I can't speak in detail about the FAA certification process on this. I'm happy to dig into it. We do this on a number of cases where we're trying to accelerate the licensing and certification of capabilities. I'm happy to get back to you with a more specific answer from the FAA.
Would either of the two of you like to comment on this?
We'd have to look into the details of what you described. I'm not familiar with it. That type of problem does come up, and we have to work our way through, as you said, the red tape when it does. You know, there are various organizations with jurisdictions that are affected by this. I was just at Boca Chica, where SpaceX has been waiting to work with the Interior Department on some of the environmental concerns associated with launching there, and it was a significant delay. And so these things are something we just have to work through under our existing set of regulations.
Well, please work on this, because it shouldn't be any mystery why China is overtaking us when we let government agencies snarl us in red tape. And sometimes you just have to take the bull by the horns and cut through it. You know, you take a sword and just cut through the red tape. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm late because I was actually at a very interesting hearing with the Select China Committee on Space and the competition between China and us in space. And I looked over the budget for Space Force, and it looks to me like the request doesn't even keep up with inflation. The increase of $400 million doesn't keep up with inflation. It's really a reduction in your budget as far as really what's useful. In light of the fact that China is making unbelievable strides in space, General, are you okay with this budget request?
I think the budget is making solid advancements in the resiliency of the architecture. That was our primary concern over the last couple of years, is making sure we had that capability protected so we could assure the vital effects that the Joint Force requires is always there for them. The counter space capabilities is where I think the timeline is not to my satisfaction. It's simply, it just takes time to get from the R&D phase into fielded operations, and resources can help with that. But we had to make those tough choices to make sure that our existing capabilities would be in place and available to the Joint Force. And now we're moving as fast as we can to put those counter space capabilities in place.
Yes, you said you're not, the budget that you have that you requested is not what you would like for counter space requirements? Is that what you just said?
The counter space capabilities that hold at risk the PRC's ability to perform space-enabled targeting is not where I'd like it to be. We're still trying to put that in place as fast as we can.
Does this budget satisfy the requirements, your requirements, what you think? Look, because that's the whole game, isn't it? China is making these great strides in knocking us off of space. And if we lose space, it really puts everybody else at risk. So, you know, I'm looking at your sector as being critical to our national security. I mean, obviously the Air Force, but really, everybody else depends on you. If we don't have you, then a lot of the systems on the ground and on the oceans and the seas and in the air are really at risk. So I'm really concerned about the fact that the Defense Department is in effect cutting your budget at a time when you should actually be accelerating your budget and increasing our capability and increasing our ability to defend the space domain.
Well, I certainly appreciate you saying that. I agree with you that space is a critical domain and will be critical to the Joint Force. I think there were some hard decisions that had to be made based on the FRA constraints. I think we're doing everything we can to put those space capabilities in place as fast as possible.
Well, I would hope that the chairman would take this in consideration and that we do something about it, because I'm not satisfied with the budget request. I'm not satisfied with the reduction in the budget at a time when China is making unbelievable strides in space. How many satellites do they have up in space right now, the Chinese?
It's about 900.
I mean, 900. How many did they have 4 years ago?
Probably half of that.
Okay. Are you talking about directed energy, which I'm also, very interested in? Are you afraid that China is developing a first strike capability in space?
They're pursuing what I like to describe as 6 categories of counter space capabilities. There's a ground-based version and an on-orbit version of destructive ASATs, of RF jammers, and directed energy weapons. And the PRC is pursuing weapons in all those categories.
To knock us out, and then deny the domain to us.
It's pretty clear that that's the case.
Fair enough. One final thought. I want to just follow up on my colleague and the bag, $91,000 worth of bushings that a machine puts out. Mr. Secretary, we need to look at a better way to utilize commercial aspects in our purchasing. And it actually makes no sense to me. I know that this bag here, it's not OEM. It's actually a FAA-approved equivalent, which is about 1/3 the cost. And in times of budgetary constraints like we have right now, we need to save every single cent we can without compromising safety. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Kendall, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition, Frank Calvelli, recently expressed his excitement about the acquisition strategy for the 3rd phase of the National Security Space Launch Program, which he describes as transformative, and providing the most robust launch capability ever. How will this transformative launch acquisition strategy help us maintain our competitive advantage over China and Russia? And is there synergy with private organizations that are right now doing a bunch of launches? I know that in our space, in our government, in our private sector, we've had a lot of synergy. Does that actually play into this transformative technologies?
There is a lot of synergy. The acquisition strategy that Mr. Calvelli was talking about is evolution from a strategy that I helped put in place with the Air Force about 10 years ago, which opened up competition. And it took advantage of what was going on in the commercial world. And we started, instead of buying rockets, which we had done before that, buying launch services and buying them, opening it up to commercial competitors. First one we certified was SpaceX. They're still involved. ULA was the incumbent, had essentially a monopoly for a long time, and immediately prices came down dramatically. There's also spurred a lot of investment in technology. So where we are today with the phase 3, as it's called, which is currently working its way through source selection, we have a lane for our most important payloads, where we want to have very high mission assurance, and we want to have suppliers there who have demonstrated conclusively that they are going to be reliable suppliers.
Great.
Then we have a lane for others, for our less high priority missions, which is going to be wider, open to more participants. Mr. Cavelli opened up that first lane with the higher priority payloads to 3 potential launch providers, and there are several who are available for the second lane. So
I just want to point out, I got to kind of continue moving here, but I agree with you, and I love the fact that there's more competition driving the price down, the quality up, which is...
We love competition.
That's America.
Very effective.
Love it.
I wish we had it for those bushings that you saw a moment ago.
General Saltzman, you recently announced the Space Force's goal of establishing a new Space Force Futures Command. Can you share a little bit about the resource requirements for this new command and how it fits into the overall national security strategy?
Well, I think the resourcing requirements are actually going to be fairly modest. We've been doing a lot of these activities, but we've just been doing them in a very disaggregated kind of way. We have our Space Warfighting Analysis Center out in Colorado Springs, which does some of the heavy data-driven analytics for our force designs. But we didn't have a place that was actually focused on figuring out which technologies to pursue, what are the right operational concepts to pursue, and then a place where we could validate those using wargaming and modeling and simulation. And so what Futures Command does is it pulls those all under a single commander that'll have responsibility for that end-to-end enterprise approach.
Great. And Secretary Kendall, the Air Force recently announced its plan to re-optimize its force based on global competition. However, shortly afterwards, the Defense Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 24 was published, citing concerns regarding the Air Force justification for reorganization, which concerned me too. Do you have any concerns with the current plan to redesignate funding for this as congressional special interests interject itself?
We understand the Congress's concerns, and we're going to work very closely as we develop detailed plans with the Congress and meet the requirements of the law. I understand the nervousness, if you will, about moving people and organizations around and making fundamental changes. We're going to try to avoid that. We're going to try to keep the costs to a minimum, but there will be some we're going to want to work with the Congress on that. So I don't have any problem with the provision in law that was enacted, and we're going to comply with it, and we're going to try to lean forward to work closely with the Congress so that there's plenty of advance notice about anything that we're thinking about doing.
What's the biggest challenge in reconciliation between those two maybe conflicting viewpoints as far as moving forward and reorganizing in a way that's going to be effective?
I don't see a fundamental conflict. We tried to communicate to the Congress what we intended to do before we announced our decisions. We hadn't planned all the details yet at that time. We're still working on that. And as we go through that, we're going to work closely with the Congress.
Great. And General Allvin, I'll talk to you offline. I'm almost out of time right now. I want to talk to you about your medical stuff since near and dear to my heart as a former Navy ER doc. We got some issues in the Air Force, but we'll talk later. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kendall, you provided our office with Typhoon Mawar recovery cost estimate. I thank you for that. And in the statement, there's approximately $1.3 billion in FSRM and $7.9 billion in MILCOM. I assume this covers base housing, and if so, the economic benefit for my constituents will be great, and it will reduce the Air Force reliance on local housing markets. That said, can you please elaborate on some of the specific housing projects that involved with this line of accounting?
Congressman, I'm going to have to get back to you on the record for that. I'm not in a position to go into the details on that. What you just held up is our estimate for what we need to do as a result of Typhoon Mawar. General Allvin and I were just there, as you know, and we saw some of that damage firsthand. We were working within the department to put together a supplemental to try to address those issues. That we haven't been able to move that forward yet, but we hope we can still do that. Guam is a hugely important base to us. Anderson Airfield is very important to us. There were a lot of plans to increase the capacity and the resilience of the base. So we need to move forward on both of those fronts to get to where we need to be for such a critical hub in the Pacific.
When those numbers come through, I'll be really interested to review. I appreciate that, and thank you for visiting the island as well. Next question, General Allvin. The University of Guam has an Army ROTC program, which has produced amazing officers and leaders who have positively impacted our island. That said, I wonder if there's any opportunity to expand an Air Force ROTC branch. Would you be able to speak on some feasibility of offering Air Force ROTC to our college students who attend the University of Guam?
Yes, thank you for that, and we certainly can. Of course, our Air Force ROTC program is run through Air Education Training Command and Air University, but certainly we have 145 detachments across, and so just an application from the university and a conversation, we'll certainly be willing to take that on.
I'll let the President know that, and we'll send it your way. I appreciate that. Thank you. Secretary Kendall, just a final question. A major focus on the sustainment of our armed forces is recruiting efforts, obviously, and to date we have Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, and Navy JROTC programs on the island. This leads to the patriotism of the people of Guam, but leaning back into the Air Force, can you briefly tell me about about Air University Flight Academy program tailored to the Air Force JROTC? And I believe I believe this will be a great program like this to provide extremely beneficial to the recruitment and sustainment of the future Air Force for our people of Guam as well.
It's a program where people in Air Force JROTC can apply for opportunities to fly. We've had one person from Guam, I think, take advantage of this. It's been a few years since that was done. But it's a good program, and if you meet the requirements and so on, we'd be happy to include people from Guam and additional people from Guam.
We have great skies over in Guam too, and little traffic, so that would be a great program for us as well. I thank you very much to the panel. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I think the witnesses, as we have heard here today, there are many threats and challenges facing our nation, but I am confident that you gentlemen and the services you represent are up to the challenge. And with that, we are adjourned.